What's happening, everybody? Thank you for being here at All Access Live with Kevin Rankin. Let me ask you guys very quickly, if you came here from any place other than YouTube, I want you to do me a favor. Go to this link below, go to youtube.com/@accesskevin and subscribe to this channel. You can like this video, you can share it with your buddies, and if you so choose, you can become a member. Members get access to exclusive episodes, only privy to them. I had great conversations with dear friend Kelly Keegi at his place down in Phoenix, hung out with Cy Kernan backstage from The Fix and Midge Ure from Ultravox. A wonderful conversation with Hall of Fame adult entertainer Ginger Lynn. So lots of great guests that are only for members, but there are 350 other episodes that are available for free to subscribers and the public. So subscribe to the channel, like this video, and go to youtube.com/@accesskevin. Also, this episode was brought to you by amazing sponsor, 5 Star Guitars. 5 Stars based in Beaverton, Oregon. So if you're interested in playing guitar, you want to get accessories, you want to get lessons or repairs done, go to 5starguitars.com. When you check out there, use the promo code of All Access Live, and you're going to save 15% off everything you see. And if you order outside of Oregon 24/7, there's no sales tax. So you're going to save a ton of dough if you order online, and you'll get 15% off on top of that by using All Access Live. So if you came here and you wanted to see my guest, you're probably not a guitarist. You probably came here because you know that he is a Hall of Fame legendary drummer, all the way from his place in New York City. I've got Rod Morgenstein. Rod, what's happening, my friend?
How's it going, Kevin?
Man, I was grateful to talk to you just briefly before we went online. We were talking a little bit about not only your pedigree, but the other projects you had working on. And as you know, a few days ago, I had your protege, your bandmate, your good buddy Kip Winger on the show. And one of the things that he told me at the NAMM show back in January was that in the 37 years that Winger's been around, there have been a handful of gigs that unfortunately Reb was unable to do, but he had never done a Winger show without Rod Morgenstein. Would never do it. He said the bond is so great. He said, can you imagine playing these songs without Rod Morgenstein? That dude makes everything feel so good. So props, man, that you actually have bandmates that love you, right?
That's so awesome. I owe it to Kip for kind of, taking a shot with a musician who didn't come strictly from a rock background when Winger was put together. And in fact, when I auditioned for the band, I had recently moved up to New York, trying to figure out the next thing that I was going to do. And when I went into audition, I made sure to only play, pa, pa, right? And slam sloshy hi-hats as hard as I could. Because when he walked over to me and started playing, the first thing he played on the bass was junk, 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 junk. Like the bass line to Can't Get Enough, right? And so I just played what I thought would be the logical, hard-hitting rock thing to do. And about 10, 15 seconds into it, he stopped, the playing, and he said, "What are you doing?" I said, "What do you mean, what am I doing?" He said, "Reb said you could do really crazy stuff." I said, "Well, I'm intentionally not doing that because I don't think that's what you're looking for." He said, "No, that is what I'm looking for. Lose me." So we then proceeded to just have so much fun, and I channeled my fusion chops, and then started breaking up the time and doing odd note groupings and playing over the bar line, all those kind of things. And I said, I don't understand. Why are you asking me to do this? And he said, "Look, most every band that's in the top 20 on the AOR charts are metal bands, whether it's Bon Jovi, Kiss, Poison, Cinderella, just keep going, And he said, "I'm looking for ways that we can sound like those bands, so we're spoken of in the same breath as all of those bands, but I'm looking for things that we could have in our band that none of those bands have."
Wow.
What a great
win
idea.
as a drummer who has studied, like prog chops and like jazz and all the fusion, the stuff that you had been working on, that's the dream come true, right?
And so there it was. So, Winger wasn't a band at first. It was just Kip and Reb doing demos. eventually, a deal was had. It took a long time, and I was hired to play drums for the
Yeah.
recording. And again, to Kip's credit, when we played 17, I did a drum track all the way through, playing it straight. And then Kip and the producer, Bo Hill, said, play it again, but after the guitar solo, in that little instrumental break, do something that you'd never hear on a rock
Yeah.
record. So that's when I turned the beat around. I delayed the beat really by an eighth note. It's groove displacement
Mm-hmm.
101. That's all it was. And it was only 2 measures long. And it made a world of difference. There it is in the video on
Yeah.
MTV. And musicians at every show would come up to me and say, what time signature was that in? Why did the bottom drop out? Why did it turn upside down? I was so disoriented,
Yeah.
And so that was a perfect example of Kip hiring a drummer who could maybe bring some other things to the table. And then, the end of Headed for a
Oh,
Heartbreak, they
yeah.
said, just have fun, go for it, do things again that we wouldn't hear on a traditional rock record. So yeah, I tip my hat to Kip. He had that, vision and
You,
forethought.
well, I love the stories you've told about the way the origin story for your entrance to the band. But before I talk about that, and by the way, too, you're an amazing storyteller. I listened to conversations you had with Modern Drummer. You've done some other podcasts, and it feels like once these interviewers start you going, you flow so naturally, man. Your stories are amazing. So I want you to tell a little bit about that story. But I must say, the end of Headed for a Heartbreak, just before we went live, you and I were talking about Jennifer Batten. I told you about playing with her. Jennifer's got this great cover gig that she does locally here in Portland when she's off the road. And their band, Norm Whitehurst, is a huge Rod Morgenstein fan. They do Headed for a Heartbreak, which is kind of a weird song for a cover band to do for big festival shows, but
Yeah.
everybody in the band gets to showcase their thing a little bit. Jennifer does the Reb Beach rip, and Norm goes off at the end of Headed for Heartbreak because of what you got to do. And he said, man, I feel like I owe that guy lunch, right? For giving him an opportunity to do that on cover gigs. That's a win, So um, you have great stories, man, about Reb being a massive Dixie Dregs fan, a huge Steve Morse fan. And that's the point that I know that when he told Kip, he said, oh my God, this dude, like he plays with the Dixie Dregs. This is the guy. We got to get this guy. And his enthusiasm for it was really the big seller, right? Because there were a bunch of guys that they were talking about auditioning, but that's really what sealed the deal for you.
Yeah, well, Kip said, look at Reb, he's so excited. I don't know who you are.
Yeah.
But do you want to get together and jam? He said, there's like 20, 30 New York drummers that go to every audition for
Right.
any kind of rock project, but here you are, let's jam. And so it was a few days later that we got together.
Do you remember the stuff that you played on that jam, or were you playing like because
No.
I knew you I guess if we went back prior to that, right? So we talk about the Dixie Dreg stuff and your stories about Steve and your time with that. When you're at University of Miami, you're talking about your love for Mahavishnu, and that was really the origin story for that. And guys, I see Tracy Coolbroth. You got great questions in the chat, so we'll get to those in a second. I want to go back a little bit to that time when you were at University of Miami, and I love what drove you there too with your teacher. So, do you mind telling the story a little bit about how you ended up there, and then what happened
Yeah,
with
sure.
Steve?
So, all
Cool.
right. So I was not your typical kid growing up in suburbia in that I was not chomping at the bit to go away to college as soon as I had, the chance to do it. I had a
Yeah.
great home life, the most supportive parents that, have seen me play every time I played Long Island and New York and sometimes other areas. So they saw me perform at least 150 times. I had a Dixie Dregs fan just before my dad passed away tell me, Rod, I hate to break the news to you, your parents really are as famous as the musicians in the band.
Yeah.
So I didn't care to leave. So I ended up going to a community college and majored in music there. And, in my second year, I had a teacher who became a mentor. And at the end of it, he said, "Hey, are you planning on continuing and getting your undergraduate degree in music?" I said, "Yeah, I just don't know where to go." And he said, "You should go to the University of Miami because they have an amazing contemporary music program." So I said, "Okay." So the next thing I knew, the fall of 1973, I was a student in the music program at the University of Miami. And I was going through a phase where I wasn't sure if I might rather switch over and be a piano player. I was a better drummer, but I was always intrigued with what was going on with the piano when I'd listen to jazz records. It just seemed like it's a free for all. They play the head of a song, and then the pianist is playing anything but triads. It's like all these
Yeah.
weird sounding chords. And then when they'd solo, it just hit me the right way. I didn't know that there was like a science to it. I just thought, all right, free for all, everyone for themselves, just do whatever you want.
Yeah.
So I was able to take an improvisation class and 101 on piano. And I was one of just maybe 3 pianists, but there were a bunch of guitarists, at least a dozen, and all of them had fat hollow body Gibson guitars with the treble off, and they were all playing the lines from the jazz book that was used at the college, Jerry Coker's Patterns for Jazz. Jerry Coker was a sax player. But there was this one guy that played a beat up Fender Telecaster with a Stratocaster neck and Gibson frets, 4 pickups. The sound was anything but, and he was so original in what he did, but he didn't sound like a jazz guitarist. So the teacher, would like get on him, why aren't you playing
Yeah.
So I was admiring him for half the semester, and then one day he came up to me and said, "Hey, somebody told me you play the drums. Can you fill in for my drummer, Bart, who is a surfer and he hurt himself? He can't play drums." So I went, "Sure." And really, when I walked in the door and I saw the lineup with the electric violin, and it was the Mahavishnu Orchestra lineup, which was the band that I was living, eating, breathing, sleeping, and they were doing Mahavishnu Orchestra covers.
Oh my God.
And then, when I heard one of Steve's first songs, I truly thought, I have died and I am in heaven. I couldn't ask for anything more than this. And that's how the whole thing happened. And so, I talk about this a lot, like, when you look back on your life and try to figure out, how did I get here? Because September will be my 50th year as a professional musician.
Wow.
And so how did I spend 50 years, But it started with going to a community college and just having a teacher point me to a university and playing piano in a class that someone I was admiring asked me to sit in on drums.
That's crazy, man.
Right?
It really, thinking, because now when you fast forward to 2025, modern rock drummers, like there's not a modern rock drummer on the planet that doesn't know who you are or hasn't seen you play and hasn't experienced your journey, through the Dregs and through Steve Morse and of course Winger. And it's hard to imagine you on any other instrument. Are you still playing piano some too, just for fun or for recording?
Not enough. It's one of my regrets in life.
Okay.
Right. Just before we came on, I sat down and was noodling for like 10 minutes. I have so much music that, I'm promising myself before it's over, I'll do a solo record. It's going to be the most esoteric recording, where, thinking back on some of the early reviews of the Dixie Dregs, where, most of them were great, but the occasional review that was not so great, it was basically the reviewer, what are these guys? Are they a rock band? Are they a jazz band? Are they a country group? Are they a classical chamber music group? But that's what we thought was the charm, of the
Yeah.
Dixie Dregs.
Right.
That's what made us different. We have songs that are in the Mahavishnu Orchestra range, but there's a lot of other music that dabbles in
Sure.
all kinds of other styles of music, which we thought would keep an audience interested. And Steve's
Sure.
way of writing, even though it's very complex, he always tries to keep it melodic and never let it get out of control to where someone who's not an avid music fan will completely lose interest and, be hitting their watch with their date and go,
Right.
can we leave? But so if and when I get to doing a solo record, mine will also be all over the map.
Yeah. That uh you just reminded me that one of the very first shows that I saw moving to Portland, Oregon in 1994, the band had reformed. You guys came back through. You just had that live album that had just come out, right? And I remember seeing you guys doing that cover of Kashmir, which was so badass because you did a lot of the displacement and the seemingly polyrhythmic stuff over the top of that ending as well. But I remember just that venue, the Aladdin Theater. I'll never forget it. It holds probably close to 1,000, 800 or 900, I think. And of those, there are probably 850 were all working musicians, right? Everybody's sitting there
Yeah.
just on the edge of their seat and watching every musician in that band. And so the generations that you touched on, I imagine that as the band grew between the Dixie Dregs, which really developed a massive following in musicians, especially, right? People that appreciate progressive rock and jazz. And Winger was probably at the point where you actually got a bigger level of commercial success, right? At that point, all of a sudden you're on MTV. You went from playing great theaters and those kinds of places to sheds and big arenas and the bus and stadium tours, right?
Yeah.
And with that came, with that visibility, more recognition. Did you feel the same sense of fulfillment with Winger that you did when you go out and play a sold out show with Dixie Dregs, or was it just different?
No, it's total fulfillment
Yeah.
because let me backtrack a little. When I first moved from Atlanta, Georgia, where my wife Michelle and I had been living for like 10 years, when the Dixie Dregs and Steve Morse band broke up until further notice. It was like, hey, everybody, go check out whatever's out there and maybe we will reconvene somewhere down the line. So, we decided to move to New York because that's where we were from and we had family up here. So very nice support systems. I just lost my train of thought.
We were talking about fulfillment from the Winger thing. How
Yes.
to compare?
So
Yeah.
right. So when
Yeah.
I came up to New York, I was in that fusion jazz rock musician's head to where I really looked down my nose at rock drumming, thinking it's just this Neanderthal, simple pa kind of playing. Uh, the drum parts the first time you're listening to the song, and why would a musician, after hearing something 1,000 times before, just play the same thing again and
Yeah.
again and again? And so I was kind of naive in not really understanding what it was that made rock and roll tick. And I'm glad that I had some of the experiences with rock musicians in New York before, about a year or so later, I ended up auditioning for Kip and Reb.
Right.
Because had I still been in that frame of mind, I would have walked into the audition, and when Kip went boom, 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 I would have just started getting weird and never lay down a groove.
Right.
I just didn't think there was a point to it. It's really silly and not a very educated perspective, right? So when playing with Winger, a lot of the time, um, it's basically just playing very basic kind of grooves.
Mm-hmm.
But what I would make the challenge uh, would be to try to make it sound like the listener's hearing it for the first time. And the only way to do that is if you're into it. You can't
Yeah.
sit there, it's going to come across that way. But if you're just playing the and then go, all right, I have to make every single note count, and I want to keep it really interesting, but I'm not adding any notes to it. That's how I always used to solve a problem. If this wasn't working, so you start doing this and then this and that and that.
Yeah.
But with a lot of traditional rock music, it's just about playing the same old for a lot of the song, but trying to raise it to another level in terms of the impact that the listener's having from it, where they don't know, why is this sounding so amazing, even though they've heard this kind of beat a
Right.
gazillion times before.
Sure.
So in answer to your question, yeah, playing in Winger, Dixie Dregs, and all the other groups that I've played with, they're all equally fun and satisfying because they're all challenging in their own way.
Yeah. Well, I mean, your point, it's great. I see that Andrew Green mentions this. Great drummer, good friend of mine. He said, I found it inspiring to see that every time he saw you play, you were all smiles, that everybody in the band was having a good time. And that's true, man. When I've seen you both with Dregs and with with Winger, everybody's smiling. I mean, it really looks, and it's an important thing. It looks to me like everybody actually enjoys each other's company and they're vibing off each other's energy on stage, which absolutely translates to the audience experience. Because if they see that, right, then they can't walk away feeling like they didn't get what they wanted out of the show. Because it looks like, there was a shared experience, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah. Well, I think part of that, at least for me, is never having taken for granted having the ability to choose music as my life, and then actually getting to go up on a stage and perform for an audience, an appreciative audience, and then make a living from it. So
Right.
there's some point at every show still, all these years later, where I will look out at the audience and say to myself, who knows, this might be the last concert, right?
Right.
So enjoy it for what it is, put your heart into it. And then the occasional smiles are because I'm very thankful for having gotten to do it for my entire career. I never worked a regular job.
Yeah, that's
I mean, I've never
beautiful.
worked a job outside of music.
Sure. Yeah. Well, that adage of, if you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life is a definite true thing, right? I mean, because you may have done gigs in particular that weren't as fulfilling maybe as another, or at least at that particular venue might have had whatever kind of, but you can walk away from there with the gratitude you just mentioned of uh, having had an opportunity to perform your craft and do a career that you love, right? And
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
I was just
Go
going to
ahead.
say, really, you're paid to get from point A to point B, because that's not always a pleasant experience.
Right. Yeah. And late nights, yeah, transport. I mean, that's a big thing. And thankfully you're at a point, right, where you've got crew and you've got the guys taking care of the equipment, and you're not having to slug drums in and out of the show at 2:00 in the morning, like we did early on, right? Those are the days that like we worked and earned our stripes, man. And some of the people in the chat are at this position right now, where they're still in school. They look inspired. Tracy Coolbroth has these great points. She's doing her MBA in music through SNU and Berkeley. She wanted to know how you got your start at teaching at Berkeley, and did you apply or were you asked?
Everything that has ever happened in my career was not planned, right? At one point, when I first moved back to New York, my parents helped me put together a resume, right? So if I knocked on doors, I tried a little bit where I got a line on some of the studios where, lots of radio and TV jingles were being done. And so I would drop off the resume. I never got a phone call from any of that. Everything that's happened to me was by chance. And there's a saying that goes something like, luck favors the prepared. And so these are kind of words of wisdom that somebody told me decades ago. And for everyone who's listening, the thing is, you don't know when a lucky break may present itself. And it might be, when you least expect it.
Oftentimes, yeah.
But try to be on top of your game. So, don't have a moment arrive where like you're in some club and it's open mic night and somebody famous just happens to be sitting at the bar having a drink. That's how my career started.
Really?
I'll talk about that. But don't say to yourself, oh my goodness, I haven't picked up my instrument in a week. I don't want to present myself to this famous person. So to drummers, I say, even if you can't get on a drum set in any given day, have the sticks in your hand. When you're watching TV, what I still do, I sit on the floor and I multitask.
Yeah.
For at least an hour every day, sometimes 3 hours. So the hands, the arms are flailing. But as far as Berklee goes, I had never thought about Berklee College of Music. And in, let's see, what year was this? Okay, 1997. This is when Jordan Rudess and I had been spending the last 2 years writing and recording. Really, it's our only studio record, Rudess Morgenstein Project. And I got a phone call from the chairman of the percussion department, whose name was Dean Anderson. And he said, hey, I hear you have a duo with some keyboard guy. Like Jordan wasn't a household name yet. I went, yeah. My buddy Jordan Rudess. What's up? He said, well, I'd like to book you to play a concert for the students. So I said, okay. Now it was supposed to be in the beginning of April, and I woke up that day in April. It might have been April 1st. There was a blizzard in New York on the whole East Coast, so it had to be canceled. So they rescheduled it for, I think it was maybe the end of July or early August of '97 for what they called their 6-week program for high school kids, where they try to hopefully get some of them to enroll at Berklee. So it was the Berklee Performance Center filled, with hundreds and hundreds of local area high school kids. And Jordan and I did our concerts. I just assumed, all right, that's the end of it. This was great. So a few days later, the chairman called me up and he said, hey, I was out of town. I couldn't make it, but I heard the concert was great. I went, yeah, it was a lot of fun. Thank you for having us. He said, hey, have you ever thought about teaching on a collegiate level? So this is how everything in my career has happened. And probably most other musicians will tell you the same. So I said, no, I've never thought about teaching on a college level, but I grew up in an education family. My dad was a doctor of education, and he taught at Columbia University, and my mom was an assistant professor out on Long Island. So yeah, I mean, I have a degree in music from the University of Miami, and so let me think about it. He said, yeah, you got to tell me soon, because he said, look, Berklee College of Music is the most famous contemporary music college the world over. And anytime a job position opens up, he said, I get stacks and stacks of resumes. So he said, I'm looking at them right now, but you're a well-known musician. The concert was great. You're fresh in my mind. If you want it, it's yours. It was for a semester which I then completed the year, and then it turned into 20
And
years.
that was the rock drum course, right? No,
No.
different. Okay.
Now that was just, I'd like to hire Rod Morgenstein to be a member of the percussion department. And I said, well, like, what do you want me to teach with private students? He said, you teach the Rod Morgenstein method of drumming, but you also have to prepare each student, depending on the semester, a bunch of required things that they have to perform.
Okay.
I went, okay.
Yeah.
So I just want to get my timeline straight. So
you said that was 97?
That was in 97. So about 97, 07, about 15 years into it, someone from the online division of Berklee, at the time it was relatively new, they only had a handful of courses. They said, we don't have any drum set courses, and we're having 4 drum instructors create courses for us. One in Afro-Cuban drumming, another just an overall, not beginning drumming, but whatever, elementary drum set course, and a funk drumming course. And we'd like you to create, I guess, like the world's first 3-credit, college accredited course in rock drumming. I said, okay, sounds good. Now, they also said, just understand that over the next year, you will probably have to put in about 400 hours to create this, because it's a 12-week course. It runs 4 times a year. And, it's a lot of material. And they explained to me, it's like writing a drum book, but then having to have hours upon hours of instructional video. And then depending on how I want to design the course, it'll have all kinds of other things. So like the 400 hours turned into about 1,500 hours. Because, I thought the best way to illustrate a point is with a musical example. So if you say, what's a really cool way to come up with a little bit different kind of drum groove, is to not have the bass drum play on the downbeat. Okay, this is like one of 1,000 different things, but I'm just, thinking of one that comes to mind, which turned into be like a little nightmare for me, because I know there are hit songs or well-known songs that have that, but I couldn't always think of one. So I ended up going on iTunes and listening to probably 10,000 pieces of music, the 30-second, 1-minute clips, to find 300 of the perfect 1-measure, 2-measure, 4-measure, 8-measure drum performances to be the perfect illustration of the topic, idea, concept, or point that I'm trying to make. And so for a drum groove where the bass drum is not on the downbeat, eventually I came to Roxanne.
Oh yeah, right.
Right. So I think it's the best way to convince someone of the importance of things, because look, they're drummers who are into the progressive or fusion realm. We sometimes can tend to go off base and think that something that is so cool is a must for everybody to have to learn, when never in your entire career will you ever be asked to do it. And in fact, you might fail the audition if you throw it in. Right. So you have to be very careful. Knowledge is power, or a powerful tool, but you got to be really careful when you pull out some of your more esoteric pieces of knowledge. Yeah. But so in terms of the time consumption in listening to 10,000 pieces of music to come up with around 300, then I had to transcribe it And then I hired a student who was very good with the music software. I'm like an IT, not illiterate, but I'm IT
Okay.
limited. And so I would have hundreds of scribbled pieces of paper that I'd hand off, and then the student would, hand me back something, from the app that they worked on. Then I have to proof it again because there's always
Right.
mistakes. And I consider myself a very good
Okay.
proofreader.
Oh yeah, you
So
caught my airheads on the promos. Thank you for that.
no, in fact, one of the fun things that I would always do with my parents when we would go to a restaurant, before we even look to see what we want, we proofread the menu and we keep pointing out the
Yeah, and
mistakes to
it's more prevalent now than
they're everywhere.
ever, right? I mean, like really just
And if when I read a best-selling book, I find 2, 3, 4, 5 errors in it. And so when I did my course and when I've written the different drum books that I have, I would go the extra mile so that you can't find a mistake, whether it's grammatical or musical. So anyway, so the reason the course took so many hours was because it was multi-level, right? Between all the copy, the probably 10 hours of video that had to be shot, and then finding all these pieces of music. And then I, created a bunch of music as part of the assignments. So students have to play along with music that has a click track on it. And each of the pieces of music are written specifically for each of the 12 weeks of the course, right? So it's up and running now. Yeah, I had one nightmare, which I'll tell very quickly. So one of my drum books is called The Drum Set Musician. And um, thankfully, it's a very successful book. It's consistently sold since it came out in 1997, and it's part of the course. And about 10 years into the course running it, the course started around 2010. About 10 years into it, my friend Rick Mattingly, who used to be the editor of
right.
Modern Drummer magazine, and he's very active in drum education and has written so many books. So we co-authored The Drum Set Musician. We started way back, I think maybe in the mid 80s or late 80s, and we didn't get it out until
Wow.
97. So about 2015, 16, 17, he called me and said, um, the publisher, they'd like an updated second edition of the book, right? So, like, let's go through the book, see if there are any, grooves that we could maybe replace with something that's more current. And they'd like 4 more play along tracks, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so, we spent the course of a year redoing a lot
You
of
and
the
Rick.
book. And so the book is a few pages longer because it has 4 more songs. It had 14, now it has
Okay.
18. So the book came in the mail. You're always excited when, your
Yeah.
baby, your new creation, it's done. So I went to sleep and I woke up in cold sweats, flipping out because throughout these 12 weeks of the course, even in a video, I might say, so on page 33, example 12B, and now I'm right. And then I look in the new edition of the book, it's no
Oh
longer
no.
there. It's something
Pages are
else.
offset.
And
Yeah.
yeah,
Oh,
so um, I had to start at the very beginning of the course, going word by word, example by example. And when something no longer matched up, we decided, rather than redo videos because now I'm like 8 years older. I don't look like the person that's in all the videos. So we decided that the smart thing to do would be when there's an error like that, uh, let's just write in an explanation. When Rod says example dot 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 in page dot dot of the first edition, it is now blah 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 in the
Smart.
second
Yeah.
edition. Right. So it took many hours to correct that. Now, one of the frustrating parts of putting together like a multi-oriented kind of course that involves video and audio is video people are only into video, audio people are only into audio, and no one's a drummer,
Right.
right? So when I would say to them, okay, so listen to the drum groove to Back in Black, and here's, the 1 or 2 measure groove. So now when I was reviewing the course before it went live for the first time, it's like, this is the drum groove to Tom Sawyer.
No.
Like, this kind of stuff, right? Because it's not a drummer who's assembling it. They're up in Boston. I did a lot of my work from my home down here. And what I went through trying to get everything just right was insane.
Oh, buddy, that if you weren't such a perfectionist, because there are a lot of modern publishers, and I'm not talking about just drum books, but you see it. You mentioned like the menu example, but if you listen to audiobooks or you look at print material, there are so many errors. And the news, especially, I will say, I don't watch the news. I turn that stuff, I have to turn it off, right? But if you read current news, I noticed that the professionalism in the writing has disappeared, and a lot of times, not only are there grammatical errors, but there's no proofing. There's no editors that are out there that are proofing these things. And so I think your meticulous nature, it probably makes the quality of your products that much more valuable. There are Angela Sandij in the chat has some good questions. So I'm going to get to you in a second, Angela, because you've been very prevalent and prolific in asking questions. But you just mentioned an artist, and I have to honor my kid. I told you before we went live, my son's a massive Neil Peart fan. Like Rush was everything to him. And I remember reading through some of your history about touring with Rush and the Power Windows tour. I would imagine 2 prog legends, you and Neil. Can you tell me a little experience about your hang with Neil?
Yeah, sure. Can you hear me? Because my face is
Oh yeah,
frozen.
you look great. Yep, and I can see you well too.
Oh,
yep,
good,
you haven't frozen here.
Okay, so I didn't know much about Rush other than Tom Sawyer, right, or the songs that were played on rock radio, until the Steve Morse band had the honor of opening up Rush on the Power Windows tour. So we did 3-week legs. That's how Rush toured back then. So they would do 15 shows over 3 weeks, send crew, everybody home for 10 days, and then back out again. And so I got to know Neil very well on this tour. He's a very private person, but he really enjoyed hanging out on a regular basis. And when they got to know our band a little bit, one show, they said, hey, if any of you guys, want to come on our tour bus for the ride to the next city, you're welcome. I mean, the Steve Morse band, like we were in rental cars,
caravan,
driving through the night if we had to. And I had never been on a tour bus. And so me and one of the other guys spent the evening with Neil, Geddy, and Alex and their tour manager. That there were only on their bus. So Neil is one of the most extraordinary human beings I'd ever met. He's like a Steve Morse, where music is only one part of the person, right? So Steve Morse is an avid pilot. He's an aerobatic pilot. He's a farmer. He knows everything about how the world works. He can do anything electrical, plumbing, anything and everything. And then he's the musician that he is, and the writer,
Right.
of music. So Neil Peart was a similar kind of person, right? So he wrote the lyrics for Rush, but he was an avid cyclist, and he would take his motorcycle, you know, on amazing trips. I know when his wife passed away, he went on like I don't know how many tens of thousands of miles his cycle trip was. But as if that's not enough, he's also an author. And
Right.
so he would diligently, write about his experiences every day of the trip, and then put out his book. I think is at The Road Home.
Yeah. Go ahead. Oh, we lost Rod for a second. I'm thinking his internet may have dropped. Hopefully, he'll get back here in a second. So while he reconnects, this happens sometimes. There he is. Hey, buddy. Yeah, it looks like maybe the internet dropped for a sec.
Okay, good. So, so when I met Neil in 1985 into 86, he was an avid cyclist, so riding a bicycle. And
Right.
if the next city where the next show was within 150 miles, he wouldn't go on the tour bus with the other guys. He would stay back at the hotel and get up at the crack of dawn and put on his cycling gear, and he would pedal upwards of 150 miles. And I I remember being in the arena. I would like throw a baseball with Getty. Getty's an avid baseball fan.
Yeah.
And then, it's getting time for their sound check, and there you would see this figure on a bicycle, having ridden, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 hours, gets there. The band would do the sound check, and after sound check, a local French tutor would be waiting to give Neil a 1-hour lesson in conversational French, because he had a young daughter at the time who he also lost years later, in the same year that his wife passed. And his daughter spoke French and English, and Neil wanted to be able to speak to his daughter in French.
That's beautiful.
Right?
Oh my
And
God.
then they would do their show. And then after the show, he would sometimes hang out. And then he would excuse himself to the bus because he was writing his first literary work. So that was a typical day in the life of Neil Peart. Now, after that tour, he took his bicycle to China, where he met up with a handful of other cyclists, and they rode their bicycles throughout remote parts of China. And Neil took pad and pen with him. At that time, he was not into photography. He thought that the camera takes the place of the mind and what your eyes are seeing. And so each day of this, it might have been a 3, 4, 5 week bicycle trip into parts of China where they'd never seen a white person before.
Right.
He wrote about the experiences, and then his first literary work is like a 50-page, it's not a book, like a soft covered kind of book about that cycling experience. And he sent me a copy of it. I have it. He signed it. It's one of, I don't know, 100 that he had produced. And he said he wanted to be involved on every level of the production of the book, not just writing it and handing it off. It's like, oh, no. I'm going to choose the photograph for the cover, and I'm going to choose the right thickness and color of the paper for the cover, and then the pages within it. He did everything. And then, after their next tour, I forget what album they did after Power Windows, he went off to Africa. He always wanted to climb to the top of Mount Kilimanjaro. And so his second work was all about that trip to Africa. So this is very funny. So I met him in '85 and '86, and we stayed in touch some. And so in the fall of 1988, the first Winger album came out,
Right.
and then it was a great ride. We sold almost 2 million albums and played 220 shows, and so on my break, when I had come home a year later, I went out to do drum clinics for my company at the time, Premier and Sabian and Vic Firth. I'm still with those companies. So when I played in Toronto, I was getting ready to do the clinic, and someone from the shop that was putting on the clinic said, "Hey, Rod, please come to the phone. Neil Peart." Oh, wasn't no Neil's drum tech, Larry Allen, I believe, was his drum tech back then. He's on the phone. So I got on the phone, and Larry said, "Hey, Rod, Neil and I, we see you're doing a drum clinic down the block. Neil lives very close. He would love to come, but he feels like it might be disruptive because of his celebrity.
Yeah.
But he'd love for you to come over to hang with him tonight if you don't have any other commitments." So after I finished the clinic, they dropped me at Neil's house, and I spent several hours in like to the middle of the night. His wife and daughter were asleep upstairs. It was so wonderful to see him and have this real quality one-on-one time with this drumming legend. And so I remember him saying to me, "Rod, congratulations on the success, with your new band. So what have you been doing since you got off tour?" Now, I don't have like this long list of hobbies like Neil does, right? He's like a
Right.
cross-country skier and a motorcyclist and a cyclist and an author and on and on and on. Um, I didn't really have an answer. It's like,
Oh
well,
no.
I've been gone for a year and I've only been home for like 3 weeks. I, get up late, watch soap operas, whatever. So I said,
Oh, he was probably so
why?
disappointed.
What have you been doing, Neil, since you got off your tour? He said, "Well, I just learned the art of kayaking. Are you aware that if you're, rowing upstream against a current of 7 knots?" He went into the science of kayaking.
Oh my God, that is
His
awesome.
brain never stopped.
Oh
And
man, what?
he was such a lovely guy, very
Yeah.
friendly,
Oh my God.
really, really sweet. He was just not into, being a public figure.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I really appreciated that about him. Just I remember hearing interviews with him and seeing him talk about that, and he said, it doesn't make sense to me to revere someone in particular so much as celebrity that I would, want their autograph. He said, I didn't understand autographs. That just didn't make sense to me. But that humility is incredible, right? Because he never wavered in confidence, really, even when he went back to relearn how to play with Freddie. And I know I've heard your stories about Freddie Gruber. There was the confidence thing that happened with the Buddy Rich Big Band, where he did the Burning for Buddy thing when you guys did it together. And he talked about feeling it a little inept compared to, like contemporaries, and wanted to go back and that was how that happened, right? Was the Burning for Buddy thing. He wanted to relearn how to play traditional grip and strip the kit down and take away all the peripheral things to just get to the core of what Buddy was. And but
I give Neil so much credit and kudos for just throwing himself out there. All right, so Neil's a rock drummer, right? A progressive rock drummer. He didn't have roots in jazz. He was a fan of the big bands and especially the Buddy Rich Big Band, and he was all about learning. And so
yeah,
that's when he hooked up with Freddie Gruber. But to be this iconic drummer, really hands down the most famous drummer in the world, nobody in a close second, to put himself out there among all these other jazz kind of drummers who know how to do the big band thing. It took balls,
Yeah.
and
Right.
I tip my hat to him for doing that. And so I got to tell this story. This was 1994 that Neil put together the Buddy Rich Big Band recording with Buddy's daughter, Kathy Rich, and her husband at the time, Steve Arnold, who ran the drum department at Manny's Music.
Oh, yeah.
In
New York.
Manhattan, 48th Street. So the recording took place over a 2-week period where it was May. Every day, 2 different drummers would come in to play. And so go back to February. It's like 3 months before it. I didn't know anything about this yet. I was in Australia and New Zealand doing drum clinics. And in my last day in Australia, I was introduced to the trombonist who did the secret, infamous Buddy Rich tapings of his rants.
Oh, God. Yeah.
That circulated the whole world, right?
That's where that came from. Okay.
Yeah. So I'm introduced to this guy. He goes, I'm sure you know who I am. I'm that bad guy who taped Buddy's rants on the bus, right? I went, oh my God.
Man.
He said, he must have really had it in for Buddy, because he said, I know you have a long flight back home to New York. So here, I've transcribed the tapes, and I've done an illustrated comic book of them, right? So you'll have a laugh on your flight home. All right, so I'm on the flight home, however many hours it is to get back from Australia, I don't know, 15, and I'm hooting and hollering, laughing, going, I can't believe the lengths that this guy went to.
Yeah.
Right? All right. So I get back home. My wife, Michelle, picks me up at Kennedy Airport. We get home. My suitcase is open. And, sitting on top is the comic book. I'm not home an hour. With that, the phone rings. Hello? Hi, Rod. It's Buddy Rich's daughter, Kathy Rich, and Steve Arnold. No. And I'm looking at this comic book, and I'm totally guilt-ridden, right? Like, oh my God, this is blasphemy. And,
right.
And she's saying, so we've been talking with Neil Peart and his love for my dad's music, and because of his drumming celebrity, he thinks he could bring the music of the big bands and the Buddy Rich Big Band to the rock audience. And so we're going to be doing a recording called Burning for Buddy. And Neil told us to call you first because he knows you better than anybody else, because you toured with Rush back, in the 80s. All right, so now I'm on the phone. I'm looking at the magazine. I'm listening, to this legend of all legends daughter, on the phone. And I'm starting to freak out at the thought of recording with the Buddy Rich Big Band. Now, I hadn't played in a big band since college, right? So now they also said to me, she said, when my dad was on his deathbed, he said, I have 3 showstopper numbers: the West Side Story suite, the Channel 1 suite, and Good News. I ask you to please never, ever allow the Channel 1 suite or West Side Story suite to ever be played again, but you can use Good News, right? If the Buddy Rich Big Band continues with another drummer. So they said, we're sending you Good News, which is like a 10 minute piece. So maybe you're familiar with. So it goes from, swing to rock to Latin, back and forth, back and forth. My head was exploding because when I hung up and my wife, Michelle, looked at me, she said, like, Rod, you look like you've seen a ghost. What's up? And I'm like, it was Buddy Rich's daughter. They've been talking to Neil Peart. They want me to play on the record. So I was so freaked out. Of course, honored that I was called to be part of it, but hoping that there was any way that I could get out of having to do it, right? But still be able to tell everybody.
You got the call. Yeah.
I was called. I just wasn't available, right? And I said, so I can't do it. I can't. And she said, Rod. I went, what? She said, remember something. I said, what? She said, you're a man. Right.
She just called. She called you that card. Okay. Michelle pulled out the man card. Okay.
She pulled it out. Right. So, I said, so you're saying I have to do it? She said, of course you're going to do it. Right. All right. So they send me Good News, and I spend the next 3 months nailing it. Right. I mean, it was 10 pages long, handwritten, not, this is before, apps, right? Finales. So I just wanted to memorize as much of it as possible so I wouldn't have to be looking at the music, because I was anticipating a very, very scary, challenging scenario. I think they did it either at the record plant or what the other big studio in New York City.
Power Station.
Or the Power. It was one of those. So the drums were going to be set up with lights and cameras, video cameras, filming every second, and the drummer facing like the 15, 16, 17 piece Buddy Rich big band with Steve Morse on soprano sax. So a day or two before it's my day to go in, I get a frantic phone call from them saying, Rod, this thing has grown so out of proportion. When word got out, it was originally supposed to be 10 drummers and now it's going to be 14. There's not going to be enough time for the Good News number to go on the album. We want you to record it just so it's in the can, but we need you to do another song. So what do you want to do? I'm flipping out again. Like, yeah. So they said, look, we'll send you 3 charts, pick one. You'll get it tomorrow, which was Friday, and come in Saturday to record it and Good News. And that's what made it on the album. It's a song called Machine.
Wow. That you had 3 days, one day. Oh, 24 hour. Oh.
At 3 months for Good News, 1 day.
Unreal, man. Whatever happened to Good News recording?
It's in the ether.
Kathy.
So a year or two later, they called me and said, hey, there's going to be a second Burning for Buddy, but it's, as far as Good News, if Kathy decides she wants to sing a song on the album, it'll bump Good News again. And then hopefully one day there'll be a third installment. And there never was a third. And she sang.
What a drag, man.
But anyway, so the reason I'm telling you this whole long-winded story is that Michelle got to know Neil pretty well on the 45 shows that we did with Russ. She would come out for a few days and hang out, and they loved chatting with each other. They both had their strong opinions on pick a topic. And so she came into the city with me for the Burning for Buddy recording. And, there were so many like celebrity drummers. It was a big hang going on. Like we, the drummers that were performing each day, were terrified, but it was like a New York City hang. So I'd see Michelle off in a corner with Neil, chatting it up, very animated, the two of them. Okay, so before the album came out, the video, the making of Burning for Buddy came out. All right, so mine came in the mail. This is before, this is when VHS.
Yeah, way before YouTube, right?
Yeah, so, you can't fast forward and, it's like, so I'm fast forwarding to try to find my spot, right? And I finally come to it. And so the way they formatted it was Neil would introduce a drummer. He'd say, oh, and this next drummer, blah, 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 say a few words. And then you'd see the performance of the drummer. So he said, this next drummer, I know really, really well. Rod Morgenstein, when the Steve Morse band, blah, blah, blah. I've got to tell you the funniest story his wife, Michelle, told me. And he proceeds to tell the Remember Rod, You're a Man. And he's laughing.
God.
So my reaction was like a Homer Simpson.
Yeah,
Don't!
that's what makes it on the tape.
And then when I got over it, it's kind of like, it's really nice to see the humanity
right.
behind the scenes. You know what I mean? So like,
Absolutely.
bands do these videos and they look like they're these
Right.
gods in their castles. And, when it comes down to it, we're all just hardworking stiffs, and we still have, the hopes, dreams, and fears that
Yeah. Oh my
everybody else
God. I mean, like
has.
that example, the imposter syndrome that would go along with that, right? Where you're out there with legends, and I
Totally.
love that you had Michelle to guide you in that way. It sounds to me, I mean, you talked in other interviews about the support you had from your parents, how just they were amazingly supportive, and how encouraging they were for you to go and follow your path. Your relationship with Michelle, I mean, you guys have been married how long?
Well, Michelle passed away 19 years
Oh,
ago
Rod, I'm so
after
sorry.
after 20, thank you, after 22 years battling breast cancer. So she was
Wow.
diagnosed when she was 29, and from the get-go, she decided that she did not want anybody to know she had cancer. So we lived a double life outside of our family and like a couple of friends I was allowed to tell, so I would have the ability to vent somewhere, but no one in my bands knew.
Really?
I'd have to leave town after, like, the nature of cancer is, you know, you initially take care of it and then you might have a good run for a period of
Yeah.
time. And then unfortunately, in a lot of cases, it comes back. So you beat it again, but then it comes back. And this was 22 years of us, living this kind of double life. Um, but yeah, so nobody in the bands. I remember in when the Winger first Winger album came out in '88, and Michelle was on chemotherapy and didn't have any hair, so she had a wig. And Kip Winger, love him to death. He was like zany back then, right? And like always like poking and grabbing, and he would like grab for her hair. He didn't
Oh my
know
goodness.
that it was a wig, so she'd be freaking out, but trying to make believe it's all in good fun. It was very weird
That
with people not knowing.
let me first apologize for not knowing that part of your history, man, and I'm really sorry to hear about the loss of her. Um, with Kip having lost his wife as well, I talked to him about,
Right.
how he's
Yeah.
dealt with grief, and boy, I mean, Neil, I mean, you of all people get this. So, how did you process grief for yourself? How did you manage that?
Yeah, in some ways, I don't know. I guess distractions. Um, I have to say, over the 22 years, most of the days were
Yeah,
great,
right,
right? It's only like the shock of each recurrence, and then the bottom drops out, and then once there's a plan of action, everything gets back to a semi-normal. Uh, and so most of those days were great days. The only terrible part of that kind of illness is it's always in the back of your
right.
mind, and that like there's this moment of euphoria when the oncologist calls and goes, "You're cancer
Right.
free," right? Okay, but starting not maybe the next day, but not that many days later, you see on the calendar in 2 months, you have to go for the blood work
Right.
again and the CAT scans. So it's always
Mm.
there, just, Um, but, we had the most wonderful life. She was my
Yeah,
soulmate. You know,
buddy.
we never fought. She was like the antithesis of the band's Yoko
Right.
Ono.
Yeah.
Like, you know,
We all know those
you know,
types.
um, so like in the early days of the Dixie Dregs, when we'd be driving through the night hours, Steve Morse is an insomniac, and so he would, after the gig, if we had to drive through the night 8 hours, he'd be the guy behind the wheel. The rest of us are like I would sleep on the back floor of the Travelall station wagon we were in. And back then, the axle, there was a hump. So my body would be arched up in the middle on my back and then getting drenched, you know, because it was hot. But Michelle, if she was out with us, she would quite often be in the passenger seat, and she and Steve would talk into the wee hours of morning. You know, they had this really, really nice friendship. And same thing with Kip
Yeah.
and Michelle. Everybody loved
That
Michelle.
you know, when I mentioned too with Steve, his relationship with his wife is so special, and the fact that they're bandmates, right? That they actually perform together too is just awesome. You know, so it's rare to find someone that understands your passion. You mentioned that you spend about an hour multitasking, you know, you're drumming all the time while you're, you know, like watching TV, and somebody that might come into a relationship with a musician that doesn't know the intensity of your relationship with music. It's tough for them to get that, right? Because it is like a mistress. Music is such a mistress in so many ways that you love
Yeah.
and you dedicate a big part of your heart and soul to that. So for her to be that supportive and encouraging, and you know, I think kudos to her, kudos to your parents, and yeah, man,
Yeah.
you're very fortunate to. And I mentioned fortune, not luck, for having somebody like that in your life. You know.
Yes. I mean, we went steady in the eighth grade. It only lasted half a year. But you know, we found ourselves, you know, back together in our early 20s. And yeah, it was just magical. I have to tell uh, one or two of the most wonderful stories about my parents. So I've mentioned how, you know, it was after we all, with my sister, we watched the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show. I pointed to the TV. I said, "That's what I want to be when I grow up." And then, you know, never looked back. And they were always supportive. My bands always practiced in my house. You know, the house would
Yeah.
shake, and my parents just they loved it, right? And then every time any of my bands would come up to the New York area, they were at the shows. So um, in the let's see, yeah, two stories. So both my parents, they passed away during COVID. They didn't have COVID, but my dad passed in April of 2020. My mom in October. Right? They were married 76 years, so they also had this love affair from age 13. So in you know, I when I was home, I would see my parents almost on a daily basis. They were living in an assisted living facility, um, but either one or both of them, doctor's appointments or in and out of the hospital. This is what happens when you're 97 years
Yeah.
old, you know, both of them. So when COVID hit, everything closed up, and all of a sudden, no, you can't come visit your parents anymore until we see what's happening with this virus. All right, so I wasn't able to visit them for like a month or more. They would bring them to a window where I would like wave from outside the window. So they called my sister and I um, when they said, it looks like your dad, he's closing up shop, right? And if you want to come by to say goodbye, you can come, right? So this was a Friday that they called. So I went and visited with my parents. My dad at this point, have you ever like been around someone who's about to pass
I
away?
I lost
Their
my
eyes,
dad this year. Yeah.
their eyes are glossed. Okay, the eyes are
Yeah.
glossed over. They're not looking at you at all. It's like you don't even know if they're
Yeah.
responding to you. There's no response. These glazed eyes are staring somewhere, right? Um, and so that was Friday. I came back Saturday because he was still alive. And while I was sitting with him and he was not reacting to anything that I would say, uh, their aide, they had this wonderful woman, Icy, who was living with them in their apartment. I don't know where she found this t shirt, but back around 1980, 81, my parents, my aunt and uncle, my sister, her best friend, like 15 people had t shirts made for a Dixie Dregs concert that would say, I'm the drummer's mother, I'm the drummer's sister, I'm the drummer's sister's best friend, I'm the drummer's aunt, I'm the drummer's blah, 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 blah. The aide held up this shirt to me, like outside the room, that said, I'm the drummer's father, you know, wow. Dixie Dregs. I took the shirt and I held it up in front of him, and his entire body went into an uncontrollable shake.
Rod. Oh.
So if and that's my last memory of him because he died a couple of hours later.
That's beautiful,
right? So it was so it was like palpable, right? So the other story I wanted to tell you, because I think you'll get a kick out of it, was in January of that year. So he still had 3 months to live. One of his many hospital stays, I was picking him up, so I was helping him get dressed. And you know how when you're released from a hospital, you can't walk out, an attendant comes with a wheelchair and wheels you out. So the attendant came in and said, hi, Rod. So I turned and said, hi. He said, remember when you were here with kidney stones, Rod, like 3 years ago? I went, oh, right, you're the attendant. I was like on morphine, out of my mind. And you walked in and said, you're not a drummer, are you? And I went, yeah. He said, you don't play in the Dixie Dregs, dude? I went, yeah. He said, oh my God, you're my favorite band. Steve Morse is my favorite guitar. Okay. So he reminded me that, right? So I said, hey, this is my dad.
Oh, buddy.
Right? And he looked at me and he said, you're joking, right? I went, no, it's my dad. What do you mean? He said, Rod, do you remember when we met those 3 years ago? I told you that I've seen your parents at every Dixie Dregs and Steve Morse band concert. He said, I hate to break the news to you, but your parents are as famous as the band members.
That's where that came from then.
It was, and my dad, you know, it just brought him to life. It was another just incredibly beautiful moment.
I would bet you will definitely agree with me that after all of the accolades that you've had, I mean, you've had, I think 5 years in a row, right? Recognized from Modern Drummers like best progressive rock drummer and the readers polls, right? Like all the readers. And then you had overall drummer 99, I think, if I remember right. And then just a million, you know, points of recognition from drummers around the world and all the stadium tours and all of that, the millions of records, platinum records on your wall. But the appreciation and respect and pride that your parents have in what you've accomplished, I would bet is probably the most meaningful. Am I right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. God, you know what, man? And I'm sorry to get like, it's been less than a year for me. This actually the end of March was when my pop passed, and he'd been in hospice, and I was really grateful. There was a window of touring that we had off that I got to go be with him during his time in hospice. And we had these amazing moments, man, where we talked about the whole reason I started playing. He introduced me. My very first gig was a jazz gig. I was a rock guy, full on rock guy, right? Like I wanted to be whatever and Kiss and, you know, he was in a Dixieland jazz gig, and he got me a jazz gig with this incredible prog fusion bass player who had just done Montreux Jazz Festival with his band. And I got to do the gig with him. We played a gig at this art museum. And I remember driving the 3 hours home with him, telling him, that's absolutely what I want to do the rest of my life. And he was so supportive of that to get me every gig, man. And so he was 3 or 2 months shy of 90 when he passed, but he was at my gigs months before. And he and my mom drove they live in Montana. They drove all the way to Western Washington to come out and see me play, and he would sit with this pride. And it was hard when I could see him just before the shows and knowing how supportive my parents were to not well up with tears because how they were so proud. Right. And none of the success anywhere would come anywhere close to the level of pride that I had in knowing that I made them happy, made them proud, right? So cheers to both of us, man, for having that experience. Really, man.
Beautiful
I
story.
So sorry to digress with that, but you just reminded me in that experience in the jazz realm, even though I was a rock guy, of course, in university, I studied all forms, right? Went to Montana State University, had an amazing professor there who was dear friends with your dear friend, Danny Gottlieb. Danny came out and did these master classes at Montana State University. And I remember talking to him about you because it was right at the height of all the winger success, right? I started there in 89. You guys were at the top of your game. And it's funny, you mentioned Neil. Danny was like that too. Danny would show up in town and he'd do the master class, go to dinner, and the next morning he'd go skiing with all the, my colleagues, my classmates. And he was a go-getter. But we talked Morello, we talked Morgenstein, and I always thought about him and you in those formative times in my life because Joe, of course, man, was his.
It's like a second
for sure, man. And he talked about the technique so much and with reverence. I mean, it was the Bible, right? It was the Joe Morello technique was the Bible to him. I'll never forget Danny's cymbal technique. And at that point, Danny Gottlieb, Peter Erskine were the guys that I thought of. Man, I love the feel and the sound of their cymbal work, right? But Danny would just rave about you, man. He talked about your guys' experience a little bit. And I always thought about how he had the incredible chops. He was a great educator and communicator. And at that point in his space, all the jazz guys certainly respected and admired him. You got the crossover, man, because you had the respect of all the jazz and the prog guys, but all of a sudden then you had the commercialization of what Winger was doing. And so you had the MTV crowd, you had the young girls that looked at these amazing, attractive guys on MTV. You had the young guys that wanted to be those guys on MTV. So you got the commercial success. Did you ever have those conversations with Danny, back then about, how funny is this, that was my foundation, but I'm up here doing this now. Is it ever that? Yeah.
Yes, sure, of course. And in fact, we try to talk every year around our birthdays because we're one day apart. He was born April 18th, 53, and I was born April 19th, 53. And so most years we've gotten to do it. I'm going to try to see him when I go down to Nashville to see Kip's violin concerto.
Right.
In May. Yeah. Well, I mean, everybody in our band and crew will go down there, as we did 2 years ago when they premiered his symphony.
Incredible. You know what? Not to get, because I didn't want to get off the Danny, but I love the fact that you guys are you stay in touch that way. And I really just appreciated his humility as well. He was a very approachable guy, and I was glad he was in education, right? Because you need those kind of people to influence young up and coming drummers, right? You mentioned Kip's violin concerto. So guys, if you're watching this and you didn't watch the Kip episode, just a reminder, March 9th and 10th, May 9th and 10th. Yeah, we're second day of March here. May 9th and 10th in Nashville. They're doing his violin concerto, the recording, a live DVD recording those 2 nights. There were still tickets available when we did Kip's show a couple weeks ago. If you haven't done so, you should consider this. One of the things I know way before the conversation with Kip was that the Beavis and Butthead stuff that happened with Winger, right, was it was a slap in the face to your musicianship, right? Because these guys, you were not just this pretty band that's up on MTV, although Beavis and Butthead made it seem like you were, but you were technical technically proficient. You guys had all the chops. It just happened to be that you also had the glossy look, right? And the kind of the sound. But I think with Kip, he was really hoping that people would recognize that the interest, even early in the day in ballet, right? Even going up through high school and college, those interests were that, you know, he wasn't going to be defined, right, by the MTV Winger days, the Headbangers Ball days. And I think it's important for people to recognize that being so well-rounded was very important. And for up and coming musicians, right, that don't put all your eggs in one basket, that you should diversify. And I think that leads me to kind of talk a little bit about where you talked in past interviews about your career crises. You had two. You mentioned those. And so let's talk about those and then what has formed into your eventual side hustle. We'll talk about Morgenstein Tool. So let's talk about the career crises into Morgenstein Tool.
Yeah. Right. Okay. So, you know, two major career crises. The first one coming when the Dixie Dregs and then the Steve Morse band just came to a halt until further notice. And so Michelle and I were living in Atlanta, Georgia. It was 1986. I had been out of college 11 years with a career that had just, you know, steadily, you know, moved in an upward, nice direction. But suddenly I was bandless, and that's all I had was my affiliation with my band. That was my thinking until that point. Like, what else would a musician do or be other than a member of a band? And so, you know, so what does a musician do? Well, do I stay in Atlanta or do I move to more of a, you know, a city that is a music hub like New York, LA, or Nashville? And because we had family in New York, that's where we were from, just made the most sense for us to go back to New York. And so then I started pounding the pavement for the next year. And one experience would lead to another, to another, to another. And really, you know, the day that I met Kip and Reb, it was in the management offices of a Japanese management company that managed a big new age artist by the name of Kitaro. And I had met the man that ran the agency because I, you know, through going from here to here to here to here, I was part of a group that was getting ready to audition for record labels. We were backing a singer by the name of Sean Montiel. I can't believe I remember the name. In the rehearsals, he was just like a tall, good-looking guy. And then when we were getting ready to do our dress rehearsal, I didn't see Sean. And then, you know, I commented to one of the guys in the band, like, who is this beautiful, extremely tall woman? And they went, oh, that's Sean. He's like a cross-dresser. That's the concept that we're going to be playing behind. Anyway, the whole thing fell apart because Sean threw a hissy fit with the managers. And after being groomed for 2 or 3 years, they just separated. But a couple of weeks later, the manager called me up and said, hey, come to our offices next week because we have an artist named Kitaro who is flying in from Japan to do a 1.5-month tour, and he needs to put together a band for it.
Question for you. I don't mean to interrupt you. You mentioned that the management office called you. So you had a relationship with them already because of this
of the Sean Montiel cross-dresser.
All right. So they knew, all right, Rod's been patient with this. He's obviously got the chops. We know he's right for something. So we're going to call him for the Kitaro guy. Okay.
Yes. And the only reason I didn't get involved with Sean Montiel through them, it was one of the musicians that was part of it that was a Dixie Dregs fan who I had jammed with right when I first came up, called me up and said, hey, Rod, I'm part of this thing and they need a drummer. You want to do it? I'm like, yeah, I don't know. I have nothing going on. You know, I got to get something happening. So, so when I went up to their offices, the following week, they said, hey, we feel really badly. Kitaro flew from Japan to LA and he's hired all LA based musicians. So the gig isn't available, but we'll keep you in mind if we have anything else. I said, thank you. And then as I was leaving, I heard, well, what turned out to be the demo from
Nice.
Madeleine coming from another room. And he said, hey, let me introduce you to these guys who keep getting rejected from record labels. I went, yeah, that'd be great. Opens the door and it's Kip and Reb. And that was that story. Reb is excited. Kip doesn't know who I am, et cetera, et cetera. But so everything
Yeah. I
unplanned.
mean,
And again, back to luck favors the prepared.
And had you not been out pounding the pavement for a year, because you think about all the guys that are out there that, man, they burn out, right? They just give up because, all the adversity. Some of my favorite stories, especially about drummers, man, are like failed auditions, right? I read, like, Mark Schulman has a great book that talks about auditioning for Bad English right around that same time that Winger was taken off. And Jonathan Jonathan Cain throws a metronome at him. He says, come back when you learn how to use this. And he walks out with his tail between his legs, and Dean Castronovo gets the gig, but he's very humble. And that's the first page of the book. And the failed auditions that drove somebody to go harder are really awesome for me. Did you ever have anything like that you lost?
Yeah, when I first moved to New York, because I had a name of sorts, I got my foot into like 3 or 4 auditions. So I auditioned and didn't get George Michael. That was around
The Faith record.
Faith, yeah, the Faith album. I could not lock in with his bass player at all. We felt time in a different place. I didn't get Patti Smythe and Scandal. The musicians were excited. It's a funny thing, kind of like, having someone say, we're not worthy. What are you even doing here? And it's like, I need a gig, So I didn't get that. I walked into the Billy Idol audition, wearing, jeans and a t-shirt. I was not ready to take the stage like at 3 p.m, like all of them were. Steve Stevens' hair was a foot in every direction. Billy Idol was sneering with me with the spiked hair. Steve Stevens was very nice. Like, hey, how's Steve Morse?
Of course.
So I didn't get that gig. And then I also auditioned for, the singer, he was in Rainbow.
Oh, yeah, Joe Lynn Turner. Yeah.
Joe Lynn Turner. Now, I was recommended to Joe Lynn Turner by the Steve Morse band manager who then hit it big with Cinderella. His name is Larry Mazer. So we were friends. And when I moved to New York, Larry called me and said, hey, Rod, go out to New Jersey. I told Joe Lynn Turner, like, you're the guy for his band. I went out there, didn't feel like it was any kind of great performance of mine. But the next day, Larry called me and said, Rod, what happened? So I said, what do you mean what happened? He said, Joe told me you're the worst drummer he's ever heard.
Oh, my God. Oh.
Now, so now you talk about, having your feelings hurt, and especially when you're in a vulnerable position, because I just moved to New York looking for the next thing, and then like have someone say that, and I like, I'm trying to think. Yeah, I'd already been like in Modern Drummer polls, and like people knew who I was.
All of a sudden, you're questioning.
And to have this guy say that. But what was very funny, the PS to that story was, 2-3 years later, I ran into Joe Lynn Turner at a party, and now I had just hung my platinum album for the first Winger on the wall, So Joe and I, hugged hello, and he said, touche, congratulations.
Yeah. Rod. Oh, man. Like having me crow. That's good, man. I appreciate your willingness to chat about those things. They're if your feelings are easily hurt, music business is probably not the greatest place for you, in all respects. But the career crises thing. So yeah, you had the Dregs.
Right. So that was the first one. Right. And then, so it really wasn't much more than a year being up in New York that this connection with Kip and Reb happened, right? So, all right. So then Winger had great success with the first record, and then the second record. By the end of the second record tour, we could tell something's happening because all of a sudden Nirvana and Pearl Jam had come on the scene, and so the videos on MTV were changing. So when we recorded the Pull album, which was the third album, which we were so proud of. I mean, I think it made it into the top 100 maybe in the 60s and then fell off the charts, whereas the other albums were in the top 20 or top 10. So the writing was on the wall. So I remember going from, theater and arena tours for those first two albums to a club tour for the Pull album, and then it's over. Hello, Atlantic Records. He's in a meeting. Click. He's in a, like nobody cares about you anymore because you're not selling millions of records for them. That was the second, crisis for me, where I sat down and I started writing down what are the different things that I could do based on my abilities. So it's like, hey, I'm a schooled musician. I understand rhythm and drumming. So there are things like, because this is 1993. All right, let me start thinking about maybe I'll write a drum book, doing maybe something with videos I could do. Should I start putting my name out there, through contacts to see if I could hook up with the next thing? And then, so that was really like towards the latter part of 1993. In the beginning of 94, the Dregs had reformed in 1992, and we did the Bring It Back Alive album in 1992. And then in 1994, we were back out on the road. So it was like, hey.
That's when I saw you.
The Dregs are back. And then the thrill around then was the violinist from the Mahavishnu Orchestra joined our band, Jerry Goodman. That was so overwhelming, to think back to being like a teenager or in your early 20s and like a band that you're going to see, that you're in the audience, you're watching them on stage and you're flipping out about how insanely amazing they are, to suddenly have someone from that band sharing the stage with you, So that was 94. So the Dregs were back, and then Jordan Rudess filled in for a couple of months for T. Lavitz. And then the very first show with Jordan in the band, none of us knew who he was, right? But he had perfect pitch. He learned all the music. He was playing double parts, saying, "Did you need me to play the bass line?" The first show with Jordan was in an Agora Ballroom in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And in the middle of the set, the violin rig, bass rig, and guitar rigs, they went down, right? So Jordan's keyboard went direct into the PA, right? And so I look at this guy who I didn't even know for 24 hours. Instead of us stopping, we just jammed as the crew frantically worked on getting the power back. And so probably, 5, 7 minutes passed, but it was magical, man. And the sound was huge. And so when we finished the show, Jordan and I started talking. Oh my God, this is so amazing. We got to do something together as a duo. So this was the fall of 94. In the beginning of 95, Jordan was doing something at the NAMM show, and he asked me if I'd like to do this song of his as a duo. And that was our coming out. So NAMM 95, we did a song of his called Over the Edge. And then for the next 2 years, I started making trips from Long Island, where I live, up to his home in New City, like a 2 hour and a half, 2 hour ride. and we spent like 100 days together, collaborating and doing this studio record called Brutus Morgenstein Project. And then we put it out right when I started teaching at Berkeley. So I'm working with Jordan 95 and 96. And then in 97, I get the call right from Berkeley. Hey, I hear you got a duo with some guy named Jordan. You want to play at the college? And then, hey, if you ever think about teaching, I have a teaching gig, that turned out.
Yeah, I mean,
it's just
it's fortuitous, but yeah, I mean, again, luck favors the prepared. I mean, you had all of that groundwork laid. It's funny that you mentioned Jordan at NAMM, because every year I've been at NAMM, he's always there, so ubiquitous. You'd see him like every he's at the Korg booth and he's working on new machines, and he loves technology, obviously. Like you see him working on a new prototype. 2 nights ago, I was at the Dream Theater show, right? I saw, them doing the gig. I thought of you a lot, prepping this interview. I had seen Jordan in other projects. I've certainly seen Mike Portnoy in other projects. I had not seen Mike Portnoy in Dream Theater. I felt like this was the best performance I've ever seen Mike. I mean, it really, like, Mike was at the top of his game. I would imagine he'd been humbled, from the experience, prior. I think you probably know Mike Mangini pretty darn well from the time at Berkeley, right? And
yes,
I really respect, admire, and like Mike Mangini. I really think he handled Mike Portnoy's return to Dream Theater with so much grace and class, and it was amazing, man. I mean, like, it could have gone completely different. Had he been a different human being, right? It could have been shitty, right? But he was awesome.
Yes.
And maybe, and I'd love your perspective on it, because I just watched this show. I felt like every guy on that stage, right? They're so accomplished and proficient. But Jordan, and as great as Portnoy's return to the band was, and his greatest performance was, Jordan Rudess held the show. It was amazing. That dude is unreal to me. I think he's on another level, in terms of a player.
Yeah, he is. He's in the stratosphere. Now, I've worked with him, thousands of hours, hundreds of days. And so I've gotten to see him in action, and it is uncanny how quickly he can come up with something out of thin air, right? So when he and I first started working together, we each came to the project with 4 songs, and then we wrote 2 together. And one of my songs was called "Drop the Puck," right? And it's kind of, I write more in the Steve Morse vein, where Steve's music kind of has an intro, then like a verse and a chorus and a verse, or maybe a pre-chorus and a chorus, then a bridge, then solo, right? So the more traditional kind of song form. Jordan's writing can sometimes be section A, B, C, D, E. Then B's going to come back, but you don't know it's B. It's like he's just done the most insane thing where the melody is now in the bass line. Then F, G, H, C, return, right. That kind of thing.
That's why they get to be 15-minute songs. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So this song of mine, was like an umpa song. So like, diddle little diddle little 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 diddle little 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 little. So the song needed a little one-time 8-measure section, right? But I didn't say that to him. I said, "Hey, Jordan, right here, I just need one thing." So he calls me up and he goes, "Rod, what do you think?" And he goes on for like 2 minutes. This is the one that, like, I'm thinking it's going to be 10 seconds long, and he's playing for 2 minutes, and he's played like 15 different amazing things.
Yeah.
Right. So he's got this incredible mind for just being able to come up with endless new parts.
What a gift, man. I mean, that doesn't Yeah, I mean, it's like the exact opposite of what you were talking about with the rock and roll focus. When you came in and did the Winger audition, and you said you just played, boom, bum, bum. You were playing along with like the "Can't Get Enough" riff that Kip was. Yeah, I cannot imagine Jordan walking in and laying a keyboard line down to that. Yeah, but they.
So the great part of a duo is, you talk about a band dynamic, right? You've played with musicians, all different bands. As soon as you add a third person, so now it's this person's relationship to this one, and then this person's relationship to this one, and this person's relationship to this one, and right?
Sure.
There's like 6 different possibilities. Forget it when you're 4 and 5 and however many pieces. And there's always going to be issues, and then in many cases, problems. With a duo, you either like each other or you
it's a marriage,
don't,
man.
right? And Jordan and I are like this. We love
that's
hanging
so cool,
out,
man. Good.
So much.
I mean,
I'm remembering the story. So we will go years sometimes since he's gotten involved in Dream Theater where he's just not available for an entire year or whatever. And we had something that we were getting ready for. So I went up to his place, right? Like to rehearse, not even with a drum set, just me with a drum pad and him sitting at the keyboard. And so when I got there, he said, "You hungry?" I went, "Yeah, let's go." So we went for Thai food. And then after Thai food, it's like, "All right, let's go practice." "Oh, no. You want to go for Carvel?" "All right." So we go for Carvel. And after Carvel, he's like, "Have you ever been to like a foot spa where they massage your feet for an hour?" "Yeah, let's go." I don't think we even got back to his house, till hours later, and then just ran through what we had to do in like 10 minutes. That's what our time together is like.
That's more substantial, right? Those are the meaningful times. And it probably makes the quality of the music that much stronger because you guys have done the other bonding things, right? You recognize that the other people, I mean, man, you can't go wrong with sharing Thai food with anyone, right? That's the best bonding experience anywhere.
I'm doing it. I'm having Thai tomorrow with my friend Frank Latore, who was the harmonica player on Down
Right
Incognito.
on, man.
And that's a great story. But I don't know that I've ever told. So it was 1993 or 92, and I was getting ready to go out to California to cut drums. But I was talking to Kip, and he said, for the song Down Incognito, I'm thinking instead of a guitar solo, I'm just hearing a harmonica player. So I'm just going to look in the LA Musicians Union book and find one. I said, "Kip, you're not going to believe it. 2 nights ago, my friend said, 'Hey, do you want to go see my buddy in a Battle of the Bands?' He's this amazing graphic artist, another one of these Michelangelo
Renaissance
kind of people,
man.
But he plays harmonica." So I go see his friend's band. They win the Battle of the Bands. His harmonica playing is exceptional. And so, it's a couple of days later where Kip is saying, "Yeah, so I'm going to just get a harmonica player." I said, "Kip, I just met somebody. He's the guy." And Kip said, "Yeah, but he's in New York." And so I mentioned it to Frank Latore, and he went, "Oh my God, tell me when to be there. I'll buy my own ticket." All this. I said, "No, we're going to buy you a ticket. How about you'll just room with me in my hotel room?" Right. So, he flies out, does a great job. And this is so great. Frank Latore is like James Dean. He had that kind of aura. This is going back, how many years ago is this? Like 30 some odd years, right? So, he was a guy in his late 30s, I guess, right? It's like very cool. All right. But I don't know that he's starstruck.
Yeah.
He's starstruck, right? All right, so we go have dinner. We go back to the hotel. It's time to shut the light and go to sleep, right? I go, "Good night, Frank." He goes, "Good night." In the middle of the night, we had one of those trains, planes, and automobiles scenes where he got up to go to the bathroom. He came back. It was pitch black. He came back and he climbed into my bed, which startled me awake, which startled him.
Yeah.
So I've never let him live it down because She was so
If I ever meet,
embarrassed. It's kind of like, kind of like I don't know, like I'm imagining like if I was rooming with someone who I
sure,
looked up
yeah,
to and I did something like that, I'd be
yeah.
beside
Like it's
myself.
good that you can laugh about it and not, call the
Yes.
cops. See,
Yeah.
I those kinds of moments where you've got these people that you revere and respect and admire. I think a lot about legacy. You about think about those other people's legacy. You talked a lot about Neil Peart and Buddy Rich's legacy going on to what Neil put together with Burning for Buddy. I ask a lot of my guests about legacy and what they want to be known and remembered for. Is there, there's a particular thing that, at the end of your lifetime, Rod Morgenstein, when you look back at your life, what is it that you want to look back and feel like this is the most important thing I want to be remembered for?
Well, in terms of my career and being a musician, uh, my proudest um, kind of emotion, I don't know if that's the right word, is I would like to be remembered by being, hey, that's the guy who seemed equally at home, whether it was in a progressive band, a heavy metal band, a fusion band, a jazz setting, right? And he didn't sound like a rock drummer playing jazz, or he didn't sound like a jazz drummer trying to rock. He just sounded right for the
Yeah,
moment, regardless of
nice.
style. That's the most
I
important
love
thing to
it.
me.
Is it as important to you for the non-musician community? Like, yeah, because you mentioned that in a music sense, this is what you want, but it sounds like maybe there's another side
Yeah.
of Rod Morgenstein that you want people to know.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to remember as a nice person who never dissed anybody, and I've I've done my best to help uh, quite a few
Nice.
people, in various ways. There's a lot of inner reward for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, you can't put a price on that, but whether it's visiting someone who's in a bad medical situation, um, or helping someone, when they're like in a financial spot. Yeah, I've always tried to act properly.
Yeah.
Properly, I'm not a
Sure.
religious person, but I think that's kind of what religion
Well, one would
teaches.
hope, right? I
You
mean,
know.
like, yeah, I'm with you. Like, organized religion, I see cause a lot of problems, but I think in terms of just overall spirituality, and I think Kip touched on this too, the idea behind some of structured religions is that golden rule, right? Do unto others as you want to be done, do as you want to be treated, or that's a horrible paraphrasing, but leaving the world a little better than when you got there, and having that exposure or that experience with other people to have them feel like you made, that experience was beneficial because of your involvement with them, right? uh, I love that. uh, your career crises, again, it led to one last thing, and one thing I don't want to overlook is that you did not
Yeah.
want to be pigeonholed and stuck without a band and an eventual career. So we're in an age and a time, right, where
Right.
we got to look at, all right, so if this band goes away, what is my alternative income opportunity?
Yeah. So, way back in the first year of the Dixie Dregs, um, I knew that I might have a knack for coming up with products that a lot of musicians, or more specifically drummers, would find or could find useful. And the first idea that I had, going way back to that first year where we were just sitting driving for hours, day after day after day, to get to the next venue, I had my sticks. I'm sitting in the car and I'm like getting black and blue playing on,
Yeah.
my legs. Right. And then one day the light bulb went on. I was like, holy cow, what if I had a drum pad that could somehow Velcro to my leg? Then I wouldn't be black and
Yeah.
blue anymore. Well, about a year or two later, I was thumbing through Modern Drummer, which had just become a magazine, and there was an ad for a little round drum pad,
Yeah.
right, that fit around the leg and Velcroed. So I went, all right, well, at least I might be onto something in terms of ideas. And then some years later, it's too long a story, but I came up with the idea. This is really Michelle giving me the idea. She was getting ready in the bathroom of a little hotel in North Carolina. This is when I was playing in the Steve Morse band. And I went to get my metronome from my suitcase, and I went, I can't believe I left it back in Atlanta. So she overheard me. She said, why don't you use the pulse from your jogger's watch? So remember, jogger's watches used to have one or two pulses with the red LED beeping. So I went, hey, that's not a bad idea. And it kind of sat facing me, and I'm looking at the pulse and I'm practicing, and then went, oh my God, a metronome watch, right? Like if you wear a watch and you wear a digital watch and you're a musician, would you be averse to it having a fully functioning metronome in it? Like what musician would say, oh no, I would never want a metronome, And so I wrote a whole thing. I took it to every company I could think of and watch companies. It never went anywhere. But years later, Vic Firth at a NAMM show, he said, Rod, what was that idea you were talking about to me like 10 years ago about the metronome watch? I went, oh my God, Vic, blah, 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 blah. So he called me, this is 25 years ago. So he called me back. He said, Rod, good news, bad news. The good news is I have a friend who runs Seiko. And he said he could make that watch up tomorrow, but I need to give an initial order of 100,000 pieces. He said, I'm a drumstick company. I can't gamble $1 million or whatever, So that was the end of it. And now it doesn't matter because iPhones have fully, okay. But then at the near end of 100 show tour with Cinderella, Winger, and the Bullet Boys.
Tour. I did.
Oh, you did? Okay, so this is 1989. I came off stage every night and my ears would be ringing so loudly. Remember, all three bands would be up on stage for the encore, right? So I'm like playing a cowbell, we're singing Rolling Stones songs or whatever. So I finally had that.
We lost him again. Look at that. That was the major, the finale. He'll come back in a second. His internet. All right, let's get him back here.
Woke up that next morning.
Hey, one sec, Rod. Okay. You disappeared for just a quick second. So so you're up on stage. You come off.
Up on stage. Finish the show. Ears are woo ringing horribly. But I go to sleep and wake up the next morning. No ring. And it was like this for years, really. But then the morning happened where I woke up and woo, the ringing was still there. Ooh. And that was the first week in August 1989, and my ears are still ringing. Right?
Wow.
Not as badly because from that moment on, I have always used some kind of hearing protection. So after that tour, when it was time to learn music for the next Winger record, I had been using like shooting range earmuff phones, right?
Sure.
And I love the way they made the drums sound because it makes it very quiet and low-endy and crisp. But I had to learn some new music that Kip and Reb were writing. So I would take those little Walkman headphones with my Walkman and put the earmuffs over it. And then I didn't have to have the music blasting like for all those years in a recording studio with a traditional headset. The click track would be so loud so I could hear it over the sound of my drums, even with no drums in the headphone, right? And a drummer doesn't have the ability to put the drums in a closet down the hall like a guitarist could put their Marshall cabinet
Right.
in the closet,
Sure.
and they can monitor the distorted sound very quietly in the control room. A drummer has to be with their drums. And so after using this Walkman headset with the earmuffs for a few weeks, again, the light bulb went off, and I went, oh my God, we're going to put speakers in a shooting range phone. And so I brought the idea at the next NAMM show to every microphone company, every headphone company, all electronic companies. They all said, Rod, you're a good drummer. Why don't you stick to what you know?
Oh no.
Nobody wants anything like this. Again, I went to Vic Firth, and he said, you know what, Rod? You might be onto something. And so that's my product.
That is no kidding, man. Yeah,
Yeah.
those have been around, for a couple of decades now.
Oh yeah,
That's
at least 25 years. So, okay, so now
did you partner with that? Did you partner with
Yeah.
Vic? Okay, so you
Yeah,
okay. All right.
So, also for 30 or more years, I've had the idea for drummers to have, a select set of tools to take care of the handful of issues that we're all presented with at one time or another. So like you're playing your snare, and now one of the snare wires is dangling, and so what do? We put our hand underneath and
Yeah.
okay, but like if you had a tool, you could cut it off and then go on with your business. So I brought this idea around a lot of companies, and the bottom line was, you know what, Rod? You can go to Home Depot, and for $20 you can get 100 tool whatever.
Right.
Right. And then my argument was always, yeah, but I've been playing drums now for 60 years. Wow. How come I've never once, when I've been in Home Depot, bought the toolkit?
Right.
I'm still at my drums, and I go, oh, why don't I? Okay. But if you have it on display in a drum shop, it's going to be like the perfect impulse item.
Right.
Like,
right.
Hey, you know what? While I'm getting drum heads and sticks, yeah, okay. So I hadn't even spoken to anybody about it in like 15 years. And then back about 5 years ago, I was having dinner with a fan turned friend, right? This is a fan who, when Michelle and I moved to New York in '86, I started teaching at the Drummers Collective, right, on 14th and 6th Avenue. This guy shows up one day, goes, hi, my name's Jim, big fan. He's a drummer turned businessman, and he's flying in from Detroit, Michigan every couple of weeks to take a 2-hour lesson, right? And so, like an acquaintanceship was formed, and then a friendship, and we stayed in touch through most of the years, right? And
this is Jim Meridian?
What's that?
Jim Meridian.
Jim Meridian.
Okay, right on.
Yeah. And so when Winger was in Pittsburgh to play a show the next day, we had a day off. Jim drove down from Michigan. We went to a lovely Thai. Everything is Thai. It's actually the best Thai food I'd ever had in my life. And I said, what the hell? Let me just run him, by my idea for like, drummer survival tools, And finally, I found an ear that went, you know what, Rod? Let me sleep on that. So now it has taken all these years, and what seems so simple, like,
oh, there
yay,
it is.
We have our first tool, right? The wing thing.
The wing thing. Oh yeah. So we got your camera reversed. It's backwards, but yeah, the wing thing is his. There it is. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, so now I know why when Kip said he had tinnitus in his left ear, and I said, why is he pointing to his right ear? Oh, it's one of those things where the picture's reversed. So, so what had started years ago as just having a little toolkit with screwdrivers and pliers and wire cutters and stuff, really with, two heads are better than one, that kind of morphed into, you know what? Let's design and manufacture one-of-a-kind tools for the drumming community. And, one of the biggest problems or issues that every drummer has is if you've not loosened a wing nut on a cymbal stand or a hi-hat for a long time, quite often you can't do it by hand,
Right.
no matter how strong they are. So what do most drummers do? They
2
clumsily
sticks.
take the 2 sticks, right?
Yeah.
And you do that, and
Yeah.
once in a blue moon, I've hit myself in the head.
Yeah.
But then also, a problem I had it on the last Winger show. We were playing in Johnson City last Saturday night with Lita Ford, and Dee Snider sat in with Lita Ford, and Molly Hatchet and Warrant, right?
Wow. Okay.
Up on stage, and I had gently tightened everything. I'm playing the hi-hat, and
Oh,
then the
that's the
hi-hat
worst.
cymbals,
Oh,
they were disappearing. So like, because when we do fly dates, we're using rented gear.
right. Everything's
I don't want to
backline.
harm somebody's stuff and like crank it. You don't have to crank that hard. The tool has a lot of torque. So, so what started as, hey, let's just have some tools that you could get, in a hardware store, one of a kind tools for drummers. The wing thing was the first creation. And after, like a couple years of trying to source them out around the world, there's like, you know what? We're going to do everything in the United States,
Wow.
right? And
Good.
so most of the process is done in Oregon, and then the final hardening process is done in Detroit. And we're so proud of it. Most drummers still don't know about it, but when you're a company of 2 people, you don't want something to grow exponentially, because it'll knock you out of business, because you won't be able to fulfill orders. So what's really exciting, and again, I am bowing down to Jim, my partner, because he spends every waking moment from like 5 a.m. till he goes to sleep with every level of trying to launch a company. We've just shipped the first order of Wing Things to 55 of Guitar Center's drum destination shops.
Wow. Right
So
on.
Guitar Center has about 305 stores around the country, but 55 of them have a drum shop with a live human being,
Yeah. Right.
running the drum shop. And so Jim today, 5 hours ago, sent me photos of, the pallets, on their way to go to the Guitar Center. So
Right.
that's very exciting. And they
Big
do
time.
Musician's Friend. And now it's available on Amazon, and Morgenstein Tool is where you can read all about it. And if you want to purchase directly from us, you could do that. And there's also a list of the almost 3 dozen drum shops around the country
That's right.
that carry it. Later this year, hopefully, I think we'll get Sweetwater involved, and we're getting ready. We've been having like Zoom meetings to get started, with it, like big digital media campaigns, because that's the last piece of the puzzle.
Right
We,
on.
other than our site, and like we don't have a lot of followers on Instagram, but it's because we haven't run ads for the
Sure.
product. And so we've been having some very nice conversations with someone who I think is going to be instrumental for us. So it's very exciting. And we even have a second tool just about ready to go into production, but I don't even want to talk
Well,
about that. We're just trying to get the wing thing out. Everyone who gets it in hand loves it.
loves it.
You know,
Well, there were some backline texts that were in the chat early on that talked about it, and it's so having it out in the field is important. The way that this is going to blow up and be bigger, right? In terms of like global exposure, it's
yeah,
got to be word of mouth. So
yes,
drummers, when you're watching this and you're in the chat, if you've not seen the wing thing, I mean, obviously you can see the morgensteintool.com. There's a link to it there. But what my suggestion is go to your market. You got your local drum shop. Instead of just going to Amazon or Sweetwater, walk into your drum shop and tell them that you want that tool. if you get the word out to them, they're going to be more likely to go to Morgenstein Tool, set up distribution. So let's get the word out where more people know about it, and they don't just go to Amazon, but they support local companies, because that's the hope, right? That I'm not, there's no way that I'm going to unseat Sweetwater or Amazon, but the more that we can keep those local shops going, they're going to be more supportive of like bringing Rod Morgenstein in for master classes or involving people in keeping this community involved and supported. So I don't mean to diminish your relationship with the Guitar Center or any of those other things, but we definitely want to make sure that these local shops stay in business and also support a locally made product. So kudos to you for that.
A very, very good point. Really.
Man, like I love that this whole time you've been thinking of ways to make drummers' lives better. I mean, really, the metronome headphones is a transformative thing. The wing thing is certainly something. I'm excited to know about the new product. When you and I was thinking about the last time actually you and I got to chat was at the NAMM show about 8 or 9, 10 years ago or so.
Is that when Jordan and I played at the Korg or Roland booth?
No, well, you know what? I saw him playing separately. I just ran into you casually when we were walking around. And I think I mentioned to you, like, I was looking for you because we had a mutual gig in the Dominican Republic playing the 80s in the Sand. And I ran into Kip and Reb a bunch. And Rod was nowhere to be seen, probably just mobbed from fans, But in the chat on Instagram, I just saw a bunch of people are watching from the 80s cruise right now. So shout out to the 80s cruise people.
Right on.
And they are in turn jumping on a boat next week to go see you on the Monsters of Rock cruise.
Monsters of Rock.
So yeah. So man, that's the next gig for you, right? You're out on the road on the boat.
That cruise is so much fun. Kip is a celebrity on the cruise. He hosts the So You Think You Can Shred event where, people that have the nerve, they come up, in front of hundreds of people and they have their 2 minutes to play guitar. And then, there's an all-star lineup of judges, of guitarists, from different bands that are on the cruise. And it's very, very funny.
I'll bet.
Very, very witty. And about 2 or 3 years ago, they started a comedy night where, they have like comedians that you hear on Sirius Radio on the comedy channels, but they have a celebrity, right, from one of the bands. So Kip was the first celebrity to do stand-up. No way. Now, he's not a comedian, but he worked with a couple of the pros, and his presentation was amazing. So then the next year, Reb did it.
Really?
Now Reb is one of the funniest human beings. He's an incredible storyteller. And he just informed us the other day that they asked him to do it again. So he's going to be doing his stand-up again.
I think, you've got your side hustle between Morgenstein Tool. Reb is going to go out and, so much for that music career, man. You've got because we all know that stand-up is definitely guaranteed money, right? So, Jim Florentine's probably on that cruise, right? Is Jim out there?
I think so, yes.
Yeah, great comic. And my son and I were just talking about it. He's one of the guys that has maintained consistency from the beginning, man. The dude he's been the same style of comic, hasn't sacrificed or compromised anything, but I'm glad that he's getting the exposure in that community to go out and do it. Those experiences on the boat are great, right? I mean, for you, I don't know about. For me, I love it too, man.
So you guys do like the 80s?
The 80s cruise, yeah. Done a couple of them, yeah. I love it, man. Just the destinations are cool, but the experience around the other bands is awesome. And the fans.
Really, really wonderful.
Yeah.
It's nice. I mean, I like, spending time with the fans as well. So like quite often, some of us, we will meet in the buffet dining room.
Yeah.
Where the fans eat. And most people are very cordial. They'll just come over, to say a few words or take a picture or give an autograph. But then there's also the artist's dining room.
Right.
So when you just want to hang with your bros, or members of other bands.
Yeah.
So nice.
Anybody
wonderful.
Anybody you're looking forward to catching back up with?
I haven't even in the last few weeks. I haven't even looked to see who's in the lineup.
Yeah, it'll just happen. You'll get there and you'll recognize 90% of the guys in that room, right?
Yeah. John Roth from our band, he also plays in Starship. So
Oh
I'm
yeah,
sure
we do a
you've
bunch
done
of gigs with
cruises with
him.
him. Yeah. Yeah.
John is like Reb. I mean, one of those guys that he's a chameleon. You know, he can walk into any gig and play that style so authentically. And he's understated, right? He's not like super showy, but he can play blistering chops, or he can play super, you know, just soul turning stuff. And you and I chatted offline about your favorite guitarist, you know, because I mentioned Jennifer too. Jennifer Batten, massive Steve Morse fan, and Jeff Beck, of course, who she played with. And you mentioned that is also those are your two favorite players.
I want to say I don't see the person's name earlier on. I think she had asked. Kip said "Midnight Driver" is his favorite song to play. What is mine?
Yeah.
One of my favorite Winger songs that we've never played live, but I wish we would, is "Be Who You Are Now." It's very Beatles. It's like Sgt. Pepper.
Yeah.
And the guitar work at the end is all Johnny Roth. Like, if you want to hear some soulful guitar work, it's on. I forget which album. I think "Better Days Coming."
Right
so
on.
Be Who You Are Now. For me, like, favorite song to play, I love playing Can't Get Enough. It's the simplest drumming I've ever played on a song on any of the however many albums of the hundreds and hundreds of songs that I've recorded. But I also love playing Headed for a Heartbreak and Rainbow in the Rose. But Who's the One is another one of my all-time favorite Winger songs. And all I play on that song is bass drum. We hired Alex Acuna to play all of the other percussion.
Wow. That's
so a quick Alex Acuna story. All right. So, I've done probably 150 drum clinics in my life. There was that period, in the 80s into the 90s. Didn't matter how many drum clinics I've done. The first drum clinic I ever did, I lost sleep for days leading up to it. And then I didn't get out of bed for like 2 full days with 102 fever when I finally got through it and let it out. It's terrifying. When you're a drummer,
right,
you're like with your bandmates.
Yeah.
You're like in the background, but, with the herd. When you do a drum clinic, it's "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome blah, blah, blah." And it's
all eyes on you.
You, right?
Yeah.
And so that first clinic, I don't know how I was going to make it through it. And now there was a reason I was telling this. What were you talking about just before it?
Well, Alex Acuna.
Yes, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Okay, so 100 clinics in, Rod, you're doing a drum clinic with Alex Acuna. Oh my goodness, the guy from Weather Report, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so now I'm backstage, for 2 hours before a drum clinic, like this. And the stomach is in knots. Until I get started, I'm just a wreck. And then once I'm out there and playing, then it's, now you're a comedian.
Yeah.
But so I'm sharing the back room with Alex Acuna, right? Our dressing room. He's like on the floor with his head in a pillow, his eyes closed. Just, he said, in his like Spanish brogue, "Rod, let me know when it's my time to play."
Oh.
He was going to sleep until they go, "Ladies and gentlemen, Alex Acuna." So I want that. And that's reminding me of Danny Gottlieb, right?
Yeah.
Now, Danny was like the prize student of Joe Morello, who taught Danny how to let the sticks do all the work. Right. And you just kind of guide them with no tension. All the flab under the arm. Danny could play at a whisper or a triple forte as fast as anybody, and there is no tension, right?
Yeah, right.
And So one time he and I were doing some drum festival in Holland. It was like an all-day event with 10 or 15 different drummers. Um, so the night before the event or the night after it, he and I were hanging out in one of our hotel rooms. And I said, Danny, can you like explain the Joe Morello thing, the playing without tension? And, I've seen you just, not even warm up and you go out on stage and, I have to do this
Yeah.
for a minimum of an hour, if not two or more. So he said, sure. So he puts a drum pad in front of me and he said, do a single, just do one stroke. Right. So I don't know if you can see me, but here, I'll just leave it.
Here, I'll give me.
I had the stick, my hand is down here, and I went up, down, right? And Danny put his head in his hand, right? And I went, what? He goes, oh, Rod, no, I'm so sorry. That's so sorry. Do it again, right? And so I went like this, and he said, can I ask you a question? I said, what? He said, why are you starting with your hand and arm down to first move it back to then come down, and you're making one sound?
Right.
You're going, I go, well, what should I do? He said, well, why don't you start from here? I said, okay. And he said, look, Rod, let me show you something. The last I heard, like the way gravity works is if you throw an object like a stick at a surface, like a drum pad or a snare drum, guide your hand, but like watch what happens. And he flings it down and it shoots back. I said, what's your point? He said, well, why are you, holding the stick so tightly and you're not letting it bounce back? I said, well, what are you talking about? He said, okay. And he started, right?
Yeah.
He goes like that, and the stick is here.
Right.
And he said, now, if you're willing to, put hours every day of your life into this, you will reach the point through muscle memory where you don't have to warm up anymore. It'll always be there. So like when you took me out to dinner and you, Rod, were so nervous because, the Metheny show is in 30 minutes. And then
Right.
Danny said, but I said, I haven't had my dessert. And like you, Michelle, didn't get me back to the venue till like 5 minutes before showtime, but I'm like ready to go. He said, it's because I have spent my life mastering Joe Morello's technique of letting the stick do all the work. So he said, you have to learn the whipping motion from 90 degrees and then 45 degrees and then 30 degrees. And he said, every rudiment, which is basically a combination of one or two strokes per hand, you learn how to do it. So a paradiddle is a full stroke, stop it halfway, like that. So paradiddle.
Right.
And you do it super slowly, but if you can stick with it 7 days a week, eventually you won't have to be all, concerned with your having to put in an hour or two before you present yourself in front of people. But I'm still that way. I never got to that level.
Well,
when I visit him in Nashville, I'm going to have him show me it again.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, you learned a technique that, and in even your warm up, because I would imagine that it's not just about the loosening of the limbs and everything like that, but there's probably a mental process of your meditation that goes into prepping a gig or a clinic or whatever that's just as helpful, right? So your ritual of all those warm ups is as much of a sort of a mental thing as it is a physical. Am I right?
I think you're right. And you mentioned Freddie Gruber.
Yeah.
When we first started talking, I took a lesson with Freddie Gruber in New York City when, what was it? Maybe it was the day of the Buddy Rich, live concert, right?
Yeah.
About 10 of us or 12 of us played in Manhattan with the Buddy Rich Big Band. And, Freddie, I mean, he was a character. He would go off on tangents and he would tell a story which he'd forget what he's even telling you and go on to another story. But the gist of what I got from him in the couple of hours that I hung out with him, he looked at me and said, "Hey, Rod, like, how long have you been playing drums? Can you just start having fun? Just stop caring so much." He said, "You're a great drummer. Just go have fun and don't think about you can't do this or they can do that and you can't do, just look how much you've done in your life. Just go have fun."
Awesome.
And I never forgot that.
Isn't that interesting that that's the most meaningful part of the lesson that you came away with, right? Well, I mean, it's obvious that you're having a good time or you fake it really well, at least that you're smiling the whole time and, the band is too. But I'm going to tell folks I see that a lot of you guys have made comments in the Instagram feed. I apologize about not seeing those. I really, I appreciate your engagement. I really just, for the most part, see your comments here in YouTube. So thank you guys that are there on YouTube. And Tracy Coolbroth, you've had a bunch of questions about your recording studio. My suggestion for the guys that you've asked questions, maybe that you want to direct feedback from Rod. Are you pretty responsive through your website, therodmorgenstein.com? Can they send you a comment?
I'm the worst.
Okay. What's the best way for somebody that might have some business questions for you, or maybe the Instagram or just find you at the NAMM show?
That's probably the best. Yeah. I'm so bad with it. I don't mean to be, and I don't mean to hurt anybody's feelings.
Yeah. No, you're a busy guy, man.
Yeah. I wish there was some place that I could tell them to write to. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you've been as approachable as one could ever hope. I am very appreciative of that. You are probably the most incredible storyteller I think I've met in the music business as far as drummers go. And I could talk to you for hours on end. Like you and I were talking beforehand about how Kip and I we get chatting, and the next thing you know, a couple of hours have gone by, and it feels like, man, I could talk to you. I could talk to you for days on end. And what I would hope is that in the eventual time that we can get together in person. I love doing these hangs, even backstage or whatever. This is the last run for Winger, man. I mean, you guys are doing a final tour, right? I live in Portland, Oregon.
Oh, you're in Portland. Yeah. So, right. We don't have anything up that way. We'll be in LA at the Rainbow, right? That
of course, famous, man. Yeah, the pizza and the pasta.
Bar and grill next to the Roxy on Sunset. That's our last show. We're playing in the parking lot in the back.
Oh my goodness!
Of the Rainbow on August 31st.
You know what? I mean, you'll probably be in the middle of your Winger tour. I'm playing New York City, I think the 1st of August, or maybe Boston the 1st, New York the 2nd, with the Flock of Seagulls. We're doing a big 80s tour. When we're offline, let's compare schedules, man. Because if we can't do it at one of your last shows, I'll drag you out to an 80s show, or at least, or we can. Heck with the shows. We're going for Thai food, man. What's your go-to? Do you have a go-to for Thai?
A couple.
Pad Kimao, chicken, medium, kind of on the spicier side. I like.
Wow.
How about you?
Wow. Nothing more than medium.
Yeah.
Do you guys ever play the Paramount?
Oh yeah, of course.
Oh, good. So I live 20 minutes from there.
Oh my gosh, man. Well, I think Michael Menza was on the chat here on Instagram. So Michael does the Paramount at least once a month with his Jesse's Girl 80s tribute thing. They have an 80s. It's crazy, man. That thing sells out. I think they do it at least once a month, but it might be even weekly. And they've done it forever. But I love that many people are still coming out supporting that. Michael's a great drummer, teaches there in New York as well, so you guys have probably done some classes together. He's probably taken a lesson or two from you. And I did see, guys, too, there were some people in the chat that had taken lessons from you. Joel Stevenette, he was there in the chat on Instagram. Joel's an amazing drummer. He went to your clinic at the Tropicana in Vegas. It looks like in 1987-ish. He just said cruise missile. Incredible. So
that's one of my favorite
yeah,
Steve
man.
songs.
It's hard to pick from those, but I did go back and do a deep dive again on the Dregs stuff, after you and I set this up. And I am so grateful, man, for the contributions that you made. I really, what an amazing collaboration of musicians. And had it not been for my Vishnu Orchestra, right, that thing probably would never have even happened, right? So,
Right. Yeah.
Kudos to that, and all lots of musicians that are here in the chat. If you're not going to the Monsters of Rock cruise, then make sure you get out and see the last and final Winger tour, worldwide thing. I think you guys are going to Australia, right?
Japan and Australia in about 3 weeks. Yeah.
And
then the M3 festival that's in Baltimore. We're the night we're playing David Lee Roth's on.
Oh, you serious? Is he?
Yeah. It's a 3-day.
Is Roth doing the original lineup with like the Sheehan vibe? Yeah.
No.
Well, that'd be I mean, I know that he tried that at one point too, but yeah, that'd be an interesting. If nothing else, it'll be entertainment, right? So,
for sure.
And then we could find all of the Rod Morgenstein tools. If you go to morgensteintool.com, then you're going to tell all of your friends to get out there, get the wing thing first of all. Follow Morgenstein Tool on his social media channels, because then there'll be a new product coming out. And let's keep Rod in this habit of only having music be a part of his life, so that he never has to work a day job. And man, I'm just grateful. This is awesome, buddy. What a really cool way to spend a Sunday evening with you. I do appreciate it.
It's been wonderful. Do you think we'll get higher ratings in the Academy Awards?
Oh, are we up against the Oscars? Right.
Yeah.
Well, I can tell you this. I would bet that everybody that's watching this has been more entertained than what they might have seen in the Academy Awards. Are you a movie guy? Do you go out and see many movies?
More at home. Occasionally, I'll take myself. I love going to movies by myself.
Yeah, I
really do.
I just saw the Zeppelin documentary with my girlfriend up in Vancouver.
Oh,
it's incredible, man. It really is. I mean, before you and I chatted online, you were saying if you're not in Zeppelin, the Who, Rolling Stones, or the Beatles, then you're probably having to find other means of work to get the finances. But the formation of that, because it's called Becoming Led Zeppelin, it's an incredible story that there was a lot of stuff I didn't know, and I thought I was a pretty schooled Zeppelin fan, but as a drummer, and I won't kill this for you, you should get to see it. It's going to be available. Okay. But there's a moment that starts the movie off where they unearthed a whole lot of dialogue from Bonham that had never been heard before. The guys in the band
no
guys
kidding.
had never heard it. So they're playing it for Page and Plant and John Paul Jones, and they're welling up in tears. And he talked about how much of a brotherhood that band had, how much they love each other, and how, through all the tumultuous times throughout the band, how meaningful the relationship part of it was, aside from the music, and you could see Plant getting teary. And I remember somebody in the chat said you were almost Plant's drummer at one point. Is that right?
I mean, that sounds really nice. Well, first of all, I saw Led Zeppelin twice in 1969.
Wow.
You ready for this? I was 16 years old. My two best friends, Elliot and Randy, for some reason, we got all of our parents to give us permission, right, to take the bus from the Port Authority in New York City up to Newport, Rhode Island, right? Because Newport was known for its folk festival and jazz festival, little jazz festival. But 1 month before Woodstock, a lot of the bands that didn't play Woodstock played the Newport Jazz Festival. It was the first time, and it ended up being the last time, that they gave like the rock band thing a try. But the place was so overrun by tens of thousands of too many people. So, so at this little jazz festival, in addition to Miles Davis and Charlie Mingus and the Buddy Rich Big Band, you had Led Zeppelin, Jethro Tull, Jeff Beck, 10 years after, the Mothers of Invention.
Wow.
It was insane. So me and my two friends, 16 years old, our parents gave us permission. We take the 3-hour bus ride up there. We stayed an hour, not about a mile away from the festival site in the unfinished basement of my parents' best friend's son's fiance's
How do you even
parents'
remember
house.
that? That's nuts.
Total strangers and like country bumpkins. And here, these three New York, Long Island kids, they regretted it by the time it was over, because like we were so loud and kept them awake at night. But yeah, there we were, like Led Zeppelin, 50 feet away. Only the first album was out. We didn't even know what their opening song was. It turned out it was Train Kept a Rolling.
Yeah.
And then like the next month, like 3 weeks after Woodstock, they played the New York State Pavilion of the New York 64 World's Fair. They kept certain buildings up right off the Long Island Expressway. So we went to see them again there. So twice in 6 years. So the thing about, I was almost Robert Plant's drummer. So I found out after the fact. And you mentioned Billy Sheehan, right? As part of the David Lee Roth thing. So Mr. Big was opening up for Robert Plant. And what year was this? This was like around 89 or 90, right? And so Michelle and I went. We watched Mr. Big, and then we watched Robert Plant, and then went backstage to say hi to the guys in Mr. Big, who had done like 3 shows with Winger. Because their album came out at the tail end of our first album, running its course. So we go backstage. Their tour manager walks up to me and says, "Rod, you're not going to believe it. About 4 months ago, we got a call, Herbie Herbert Management, who managed Journey, Santana, and Mr. Big. They called our office looking for you. They couldn't find a phone number to call you. Robert needed a drummer immediately for his tour. But I told them you weren't available because you were out with Winger." And so Pat Torpy, Mr. Big's drummer, did it. I wanted to
I'll bet. But
now I don't know if I would have been available, but that's beside the point. It just would have been so nice to get the phone call,
that's
because he's my favorite singer.
God. I mean, that of course, that's like, the Mount Rushmore of like all-time great opportunities. And I do love that, honestly, and don't take offense, I'm glad that Pat got that opportunity as well, because
he was such a lovely,
amazing man.
being.
Rest in peace, Pat Torpy. Like, wicked drummer and a really solid human being.
He sure was. Winger did 3 shows with Mr. Big in Brazil, maybe a year or so before Pat passed. So I'm so glad that I got to spend some real quality time.
Man, you definitely have rubbed shoulders with just greats. I have to ask you, and please be honest, man. You saw those 2 Zeppelin shows in 1969. Did you see it in Bonzo then?
You ready? You're not going to believe this. And I was only 16 years old. I was not overwhelmed by the band.
I bet.
I thought I was also a major Jethro Tull fan at the time, and they were like extraordinary live. But for some reason, Led Zeppelin didn't seem on that same level as Jethro Tull.
There is a lot of footage of Zeppelin on that first tour where people are sitting, watching, arms crossed, not even, vibing on that band at all. Well, there's a lot of footage in this movie too that shows that people really didn't get it. They really were not into Zeppelin on that first album. And Page drove the ship. Page went in and he already controlled the keys to that kingdom. And it's really cool that the record label, well, you guys shared a record label with Atlantic, right? I think that he walked into Atlantic and said, "Here's the first album. here's the set order. Here's the first single we're going to release. You guys don't get to hear it. We're going to actually put this out. And they gave him all that.
That was unheard of back then.
And then the record kind of failed. And so then he brought the second record to him the same way. And of course, then it took off, right? With a whole lot of love. And at the beginning, people didn't see it. So I'm not surprised that you felt that same way.
But they were so groundbreaking. And I have to mention, John Paul Jones is the unsung hero of that band, right? Pedal steel, mandolin, like all of that. And the organ.
And humble. Amazing. You could see it. Every interview you see him. He's a fan of music and a good human being. Probably loves Thai food,
They had so many levels in that music, yes, a rock band, but like all these folk elements
and old blues, man, super old Delta.
Classical,
that's I love that you've had this span of time though where really you got to see all the legends. You've worked with all the legends. I hate to say it, man, I'm not just kissing your ass here on the show. You are a legend. So many of the people have seen this in the chat. Like you've influenced hundreds of thousands of musicians out there. It's remarkable to me that you have stayed grounded. I know you've been through the ringer, man, in all sorts of respects. Again, man, my apologies for the loss of Michelle. I'm grateful, man, that she was there in your life to help kind of steer you in the direction that you went. And I'm really thankful that Kip, when we were talking, Kip said so many amazing things about working with you. And he said, yeah, you and Rod, you're going to hit it off. You're really going to have a great conversation, and suggested that I get a hold of you. I feel like you and I have known each other a long time, just getting to know, the Rod Morgenstein that I read about in Modern Drummer. So,
we'll
I'm looking forward to it. Yeah, man. Well, let's go for foot baths, and you go invite Jordan. We'll I'm due for that. Skip Stone, you've been so prolific in comments. Them Crooked Vultures is another unsung hero project of John Paul Jones, but he nailed the Manic for Nirvana tour conversation that we were talking about when Pat Torpy was out playing drums. He wanted to know if Reb or Paul is showing up next week on the Monsters of Rock cruise. So of course Reb's going to be in the Monsters of Rock 3.
Yeah, Reb
and Paul will be there as well. Yeah,
there.
So.
John can't make this cruise. He'll be out with Starship. So Howie Simon is John's sub.
Howie's amazing. Wonderful. Yeah, I saw him at the NAMM show a couple last month actually. It's
I know we've been talking for so long. I have to tell this quick story. Okay, so 10 years ago, John Roth's sub was Donnie Smith, right? Donnie Smith, he looks like a neo-Nazi, but he's like a teddy bear, sweetheart of humor. Shaved head, tough looking. All right. So when he joined the band, he and I, maybe we knew each other one day. He and I were alone in a car driving from wherever we were to wherever we were going, right? So we had 3 hours. And in the car, he said to me, Rod, he's like a fanboy, right? He said, my 3 favorite bands are Winger, Mr. Big, and Extreme. Wow. And I cut my teeth on guitar on, Reb Beach, Paul Gilbert, and Nuno Bettencourt. So I said, no, I get it because of your age. Those are your 3 favorite bands, but after the Beatles and the Stones and Zeppelin, and he said, no, I know those bands are great, but no, Winger, Mr. Big, Extreme on the top. Then somewhere in there's the Beatles and this, all that. It doesn't compute, right? So we did the show, and this was the rarest of occasions where we were staying over at an airport hotel. We had very early flights, and we were only going to be in the rooms for 4 or 5 hours. So we decided to save the money and double up. So Kip and Reb took one
Okay.
hotel room. This was when we were a
Okay.
4-piece, and I roomed with Donnie. All right, so we get to the room, brush our teeth, go to the bathroom. I get in my bed. He gets in his bed. I go, hey, Donnie, let me know. Can I shut the light? He goes, yeah. So I say, good night, Donnie. I shut the light, and now in the darkness, I hear, I can't believe I'm sleeping in the same room as Rod Morgenstein. So, all right, so I turn on the light, and I go, what the, Donnie? Like, come on. He goes, you don't understand. He said, let me ask you, if John Bonham was lying where I'm lying in my bed, would you just go, good night,
Right.
John, and shut the light and go to sleep and then, get up and go on your, I go,
Yeah.
point taken. It's just, it's not something that I could
Sure.
comprehend that somebody's favorite band, number 1, 2,
Yeah.
or 3 is a band that I'm in.
It's a generational thing, man, for sure. You know that a
Yes.
lot of you guys
Yeah.
out there have your band name tattooed all over them. They do, man, for sure. And you laugh about it, but that's like Neil saying, "I don't understand autographs." It's just like it doesn't compute to you. But
Yeah.
if they grew up at a time where their exposure to music, I mean, maybe they didn't have parents or big siblings that introduced them, to my Vishnu Orchestra or, like Miles Davis or, even Beatles or Stones or whatever. But their parents grew up where Headbangers Ball on Saturday night was there. That's all they waited all week for Headbangers Ball, where Ed Sullivan
Right.
Theater was the Ed Sullivan Show was your, pivotal moment. But for them, it was like, oh my God, 17 just came out on Headbangers Ball. What was that? First of all, the dude so hot singing, whatever, and I'm 17, maybe he's singing to me, whatever, but those people, like that was everything to them. I am in that category, right? I grew up in Montana where I'm not exposed to the greatest players that are coming through New York City. I was fortunate and lucky to have Danny Gottlieb come through and teach classes, and fortunate that my dad dragged me to go see Chick Corea Acoustic Band and introduced me to Dave Weckl, and if I hadn't seen those things,
Right.
my trajectory would have been completely different. I would have been, well, he also drove me the 3 hours to go see Winger, Cinderella, Bullet Boys, and so those were pivotal moments. I get it. I get Donnie. I understand, buddy. It's okay, man. And you'll see those people, man, next week when you go on the Monsters of Rock cruise. There are going to be people,
Yeah.
probably a
Yeah.
bunch of people with Winger tattoos that are going to come up and want to get pictures. I love it that you're willing to take the time and chat with those guys. I mean, we're all very, very fortunate to have Rod Morgenstein in our lives, influencing in the way that you have done, man. So props to you, man. I really commend you for being as human as you are, for being such an influential person in our industry.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much, Kevin.
Andy
Appreciate
Miller,
it.
he loves you, says he's watching here too. So Andy Miller, props to you.
Andy just recently saw Dream Theater in Phoenix.
Oh, right on. Yeah. Well, that was a fun show last night, man. And I think the next time you and I get together, we'll have foot baths, we'll get some Thai food, we'll get Jordan together, and we can then talk about the 40th anniversary Dream Theater tour, and we'll reflect on what his experience was. But in the meantime, folks, get out there, get to see Rod while you can with the Winger Show, because it's going to be wrapping up this year. And buy the wing thing on morgensteintool.com, or tell your drum companies to ask for it. Rod Morgenstein, it is late in New York City right now. You stayed up late hanging out with me instead of watching the Academy Awards. So I am grateful for you. And to all you guys in the chat, if you didn't do so, I want you to go to this link and please subscribe to this channel. You need to go back and look at the beginning. If you came here late, there's almost 3 hours of great conversation from Rod Morgenstein here, and a really fun conversation with his bandmate Kip Winger from about a week and a half ago. I've also got, in the next week, I've got great guests. Tomorrow night at 5 o'clock Pacific, got Rob Dacre, incredible musician, producer. But I don't know if you're hip with the Dan Reed Network, if you knew that band at all. But
Yeah.
Amazing band. Rob's keyboardist in that band, and he's they've got a new record coming out. We're going to talk tomorrow at 5 o'clock Pacific. Tuesday, Julian Shaw Taylor, otherwise known as the Singularity. He'll be on Tuesday. Marina V, amazing Russian pianist and singer who just had a Symphony of Metal record out with Bruce Kulick and Dave Ellefson. And boy, I can't remember who else is on the record, but it's awesome. Eva Gardner from Pink is going to be on the show in a few days. So guys, just subscribe to the channel, come back and hang. This is what happens, right? We get to meet amazing people like Rod, and all of a sudden they're your best friend hanging out with you in their living room. So Rod, I really appreciate this, man. You're amazing.
Thanks, man. You do a great job.
I love it. It's almost as fun as being on stage playing drums, almost, but I do look forward to getting to see you again. I hope I get to see this last run of you guys, and hi to the fellas for me. And man, again, folks, subscribe, go to the rodmorgenstein.com site or go to check out morgensteintool.com, and let's get this guy a third career. All right. No more career crises. This is all about getting Rod out there. So guys, thanks again. Have a great evening, and we'll see you on the next run. I'll talk to you guys soon.
Thanks, everybody.